This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
4 minutes after 10 is the time. A quick line from this letter that Diane Abbott and Edward Lee, the mother and father of the house, respectively, have written together. Just one paragraph. Imagine the pensioner whose children cannot afford houses of their own, watching her limited savings, earmarked for those children, disappear on social care and so feeling a, quote, duty to die. Just think on that for a moment. I have struggled, I think, to articulate to you why this story makes me feel different from how most other stories that we discuss together do. It's a danger of my job, I think. I've mentioned to you before, you've got to guard against seeing everything as a potential topic. Sometimes you have to pause and reflect upon the ramifications of a story far beyond the four walls of this studio or your ears, you know, far beyond the time that we spend together. So, I mean, to put it bluntly, my gut reaction sometimes will be, crikey, that would make a good phone-in. And that can cover a multitude. Well, as you know, it could cover almost anything. I also occasionally find myself thinking that would not make a good phone-in, even though it is an important story or a big story. And you see it this week, most obviously, with farmers' inheritance tax and winter fuel payments, both of which have detained us for quite a long time on various mornings. They're good stories and they're really good conversations. But in the great scheme of things, in terms of humanity itself, our relationship as a society with the great imponderables, they don't actually matter that much. The pendulums swing backwards, they swing forwards. Tax was paid by farmers until 1984 and then not paid by farmers after 1984, and now it will be paid by farmers, although half of what everybody else pays. Winter fuel allowances didn't exist, and then they did exist, and now they're not going to exist again for a huge number of patients. The pendulum swings, and it can swing back again. And you debate the desire for a policy. This is of a completely different order, and I think I'm not going to say failed, but I think I've struggled to articulate to you completely why I feel it's of a completely different order. It's not something that you file under policy pronouncements. This is a fundamental shift in our entire society's attitude to life itself. I'm going to say that again. It is potentially a fundamental shift in our society's attitude to life itself, because it introduces the possibility of selective death or assisted dying at an institutional, a national level. That doesn't mean it's a bad idea, but it does perhaps add weight to the warnings from Diane Abbott and Edward Lee today that things are moving rather quickly. James Frith, a Labour MP, says it's a door I don't want opened by a new parliament learning its skills. He adds, I think this risks feeling rushed and not the right time. I don't want this door opened by a new parliament learning its skill, given too little time and with much that can be added once the principal shift happens. For me, this is protecting our most vulnerable groups, as well as all of us at our most vulnerable. We probably, between us, don't know enough about the rubric of parliamentary process to know how realistic these fears are. But that's why the intervention of the mother and the father of the house is so key, because they will know more about the business of Parliament than almost anybody else alive. And their warning today is that it is being rushed through and is putting vulnerable people at risk. They describe insufficient scrutiny of the bill, and they want Parliament to instead focus on better health and care services. Which brings me to another story in today's news, which I think is impossible to separate from this one. This is a story that shows that legalising assisted dying hampers progress in hospice care. This is an international study of countries where this sort of legislation has already been introduced. And it finds that palliative services in countries where assisted dying is legal fail to match the standards of those banning the practice. So, professor in medical ethics at the Anscombe Bioethics Centre in Oxford, he's identified, he says, clear evidence that end-of-life care is deteriorating in some of the countries that have changed the law. I, as you know, watched a friend die, and that hideous experience was ameliorated enormously by the ministrations of hospice carers, by the ministrations of palliative carers. There were moments of epic beauty during that period of time, and it was provided largely by the selflessness and commitment and compassion of these people. Now, how that commitment or compassion could be diminished or be reduced by the existence of assisted dying legislation is not immediately clear to me. But it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Especially when you return to that paragraph about the mother, the pensioner, whose children can't afford houses of their own, watching her limited savings, earmarked for those children, disappear on social care, and so feeling a duty to die. There's just a sense to me of, what's the word I'm looking for? There's just a sense to me of planets aligning, planets of concern aligning, it all just beginning to feel a little bit too quick. I'm not sure I'd have had the confidence to articulate that thought on air if it wasn't for this intervention from Edward Lee and Diane Abbott. Because what is the point of having long-serving parliamentarians if you do not listen to them when they voice concerns about things that Parliament is doing? So how on earth is this a phone-in? Well, Brian's already been in touch from Cardiff. He writes, it's a fundamental change away from church-driven values to modern world values. And that's a hook on which I would like to hang my hat. But it doesn't address the concerns that are being made today, the concerns that are being expressed today. And Lonnie, picking up on some of my language, I disagree. They write, it's not a change in our attitude to life, but a change in our attitude to death. It's both. You cannot change your attitude to death without changing your attitude to life. They are literally yin and yang. They are two sides of the coin of existence. And part of the concern is, as you make the valid point about it being currently restricted to terminal illnesses and the 6-month prognosis, the concerns being expressed in this letter are about what it might usher in and what might happen next, and whether or not the legislation will be robust and strong enough to guard against moves towards what has happened in other countries. So you have that slightly abstract sense of things moving too quickly. You have some statistical support provided by Professor David Jones, director of the Anscombe Bioethics Centre in Oxford. You have some statistical support for the idea that palliative care deteriorates. It's about a society's prioritisation, isn't it? And why would you pump huge amounts or large amounts of money and effort and concern and focus into palliative care if the opportunity to turn off your own life were there at the same time? I can see a link, a relationship between those two things. But again, it's not crystal clear to me. And it is the most frequently quoted finding from the committee that's been looking into this, in the Health and Social Care Committee report. The most frequently quoted finding from the report they published in February is the claim by MPs that they did not see any indications of palliative care deteriorating. So he's looked at more up-to-date figures and arrived at exactly the opposite conclusion. The number of palliative care services fell by 5% in Belgium, the Netherlands and Luxembourg, 3 of the 4 European countries where the practice is legal. You look at the 20 countries where it's banned, palliative care services have grown by 25% on average in the same period. So it's 13 minutes after 10. I think it was a mistake of mine to try to confine this conversation to people who haven't got personal experience of some of the issues involved. You understand why I did it. It obviously, if you've watched someone you adore die in intolerable pain, then you find the opportunity or the invitation, the introduction of an opportunity for that to have been ended early, impossible to resist. Of course you do. And that's the thing. I think I would too. So who should be taking these decisions? I'm with Brian in Cardiff up on his point about religion. It shouldn't be priests. You don't get to impose, however devout you are, however wonderful a life you lead, you don't get to impose your moral codes on other people who don't share your beliefs or your faith or your thoughts about the unknowable. Okay? So it can't be priests, it can't be bishops, even though they still sit in the House of Lords. Who should it be? Who makes these decisions? What do you think it might mean? 0345 6060 973 for society. Will it change things? But far beyond the individual experiences of patients and their families, is this going to change something that we're not properly talking about or understanding? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. I don't know how the legislative rubric works, but I do know that if you wanted to find people that did have a fairly strong qualification to talk on these sort of subjects, the two longest serving members, or the longest serving woman and the longest serving man in the House of Commons, would probably be quite a good place to start. So what are your worries? 0345 6060 973. And that is not a question that I've really asked you before. I'm going to say that again. What are your worries about this legislation? So I'm not actively excluding people who want it and who welcome it, but I am confining the conversation this morning to your worries. I know what Edward Lee and Diane Abbott's worries are, and they are as much about parliamentary process as they are about the principle. But what are your worries? If you work in palliative care, if you have cared for someone moving towards the end of their life, if you have had some experiences in this field, what are your worries regarding what you know or what you think you know about the proposed legislation? And if, like me, you don't have much personal investment in this, albeit that I lost a friend who would absolutely have qualified under the criteria that have been announced so far, I'm fairly confident that they wouldn't have wanted to avail themselves of this opportunity even if it had existed. There were moments of beauty at his bedside, even though we couldn't be 100% sure he knew we were there. So what are your worries about this? And I think we can do thin end of the wedge on this, particularly if you can pin it to experiences in other countries. If you can explain why you worry that this might happen because it has happened in Canada, for example. I don't know enough to speculate too much on that in that field, but I do know this. There are many, many reasons to be worried, and James Frith, the Labour MP, expresses one of them when he says, "It's a door that I don't want opened by a new Parliament learning its skill. It's a position that is endorsed by the longest serving man and the longest serving woman MP. And it adds to my growing sense that I've spoken to you about in the past. It adds to my growing sense of unease that I can't fully articulate and which I feel embarrassed by when you tell me about what your family went through." So what are you worried about as the move towards the legalisation of assisted dying in this country both gathers pace and causes concern? The number you need, as always, is 0345 6060 973. You can be philosophical, you can be theoretical, you can be ethical, you can be medical, you can be any of the things that we try to be every day on this show in various different ways. But I want to know what your worries are. 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 20 minutes after 10. Here's an early wrinkle in some of our thinking from Ian in Bournemouth, who writes, "On the whole, I've been in favour of assisted dying. However, your caller yesterday, I think he was called Ben, indeed he was Ian, he said he'd rather be euthanised than struggle with his money worries anymore." And that very much gets filed under thin end of the wedge fears. Stephen Kirkham writes, it's not embarrassing, James, it's simply human instinct to preserve life. We all want to live, so the prospect of ending a life goes against our natural born instincts. I think that's true, although I have the added worry of wondering whether or not it's the lens of my Catholicism, the lens of my very, very religious education, my religious schooling that gives me some pause. I hope not, because as I said, you don't get to impose your moral codes on anybody else. Not on my watch, anyway. George is in St Albans. George, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James.
Hello, mate.
So for me, it's about hope. Life, innate to human beings, innate to our humanity, is this desire to live, a desire to fight, a desire to have hope for a better future. As soon as we start legislating death and allowing selective dying, we're just going to reduce and erode more and more that hope, that innate hope that's in us as humanity, the hope for a better future.
Gosh.
My message today to anyone who's listening, to anyone who's out, and my mother died. She suffered with smoking-induced lung cancer, and she went through a very painful death many years ago, back in the 90s, and it wasn't very pleasant to watch. So I'm not unempathetic about this.
Of course,
but this is not a slippery slope. This is a sheer cliff drop. That if we approve this, we are going to effectively give the green light just for people to end their lives. And don't think that we are going to be able to control this through legislation, because what's going to happen is this is going to become an acceptable cultural norm in our society.
Well, it won't on the first day that the bill is passed. So
James,
no, it can't. I mean, literally, the safeguards will be in place and the criteria will be established. But I think what you're articulating is a very strong sense that once the seal is broken, so to speak, there'll be no stopping it. It will spread into areas that the current legislation is actually deliberately avoiding, but you feel that momentum will become unstoppable very quickly, I think.
It's going to be a sheer drop. It's going to be like opening the sluice gates of an overflowing dam. We will not be able to stop this.
Well, two doctors and a High Court judge, just to clarify where we're in mild disagreement on this, two doctors and a High Court judge will ensure that those sluice gates are not just sort of smashed open on day one, but you, over a much longer period of time, you'll feel it. And I think I agree. I think I share some of your concern, the idea that I can't see it stopping here.
Think of the young people.
Well, think of the phone-ins, actually. Think of the phone-ins that you would now be having if this had been in place for 5 years and someone started suggesting that it should be extended further and it should be that you don't have to be terminally ill or you don't.
How do you tell a young person who's got anorexia, it's fine, just kill yourself? Where's the hope with this? People, we've been through all the science, the brain development at the age of 25. We don't even have, this is not even a scientific debate anymore. This has gone back purely to a moral human debate.
And we need to keep religion out of it for that reason, I think, because religion is subject.
Religion's got nothing to do with it.
Exactly that. Morals and ethics can transcend all religions.
Remember, implanted inside every human being is the innate goodness and desire to life. That's why we have children. That's why we have weddings. That's why we have birthday parties.
The evolutionary drive to survive. And you think that this actually challenges that or stymies that.
It goes beyond that. It's going to kill hope. And we are going to pay a dreadful price.
Wow. That phrase will resonate, and people are welcome to challenge it and unpick your reasoning, but I thank you for expressing it so coolly. It will kill hope. And as you mentioned eating disorders, Natasha Devon, who of course will be with you at the weekend on LBC, messaged me to say my friend Hope Virgo, who is an eating disorder campaigner, I'm familiar with her work, and a very good person, is extremely worried that anorexia patients will qualify under assisted dying criteria, and people will then give up on them when they could be helped to recover. My friend Jen in Stilton, who messages me an awful lot and has had a terrible time of things with both eating disorders and strokes, expresses similar thoughts. There are, fears and worries that are not going to be in any way assuaged or addressed by a sense of this moving through Parliament very speedily. Let's go to Alison, who's in Falkirk. Alison, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I'm coming at this from the perspective of someone who has a profoundly disabled person in their life, my grandson.
Yes.
And also I've worked in the field of childhood disability. And I think my worry is that it moves the dial on society's attitude to what is a valuable life.
Wow.
So
yes.
It's not unknown for somebody to say to me that somebody who, for example, was damaged at birth through anoxia had no life worth living. And that's not true, because from the perspective of the person, that's the only life they've got. That's it.
Yes.
And they are worthwhile in and of themselves. That is my grandson, and I am absolutely with the disabled population who are worried about this. But I think it's the change in the society's attitude, and we've already lived through it, James, in COVID, when people who had a disability, regardless of whether they were more or less likely to die from COVID,
yes.
were not ventilated, particularly people with learning disabilities.
And you see that as
a
cost-benefit analysis.
Yeah, but lives can't be counted in costs, James.
Well, they can't. I mean, that is just one of the brutal truths of reality. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the National Institute for Clinical Excellence deciding what drugs can and can't be provided by the NHS, which they do entirely on a cost-benefit ratio. So I wasn't criticising or contradicting you. I was just reminding everybody that these it is the role of society to make these decisions and to make these calculations. And COVID is a wonderful example, not just on the ventilation front, but also on how many people became increasingly emboldened to say, why should I have to do anything just to protect old people or disabled people or sick people? Just lock them all away and keep them all isolated and let the rest of us go about our daily business, which displayed ignorance of virus, but also a callousness of community, an absence of community.
So my worry is that and I'm not, I fully respect the view that this is shortening someone's death.
Yes.
So I question myself about it, but I worry that it changes the dial in society, that it's okay to kill somebody or for somebody to take their life.
That is very, very hard to argue with. And I'm not making light of what you've described by any stretch of the imagination, but you did suddenly make me think of the Spartans. Would you believe the kind of the race that was locked in warfare with ancient Greece, and the Spartans had incredibly utilitarian approaches to these matters, and babies born with disabilities would be thrown off cliffs. People who were not able to make measurable material contributions to society were dispensed with, and it moves us still a million miles away, morally speaking, from where we will be, but it would be a tiny step closer to it. Is your fear brilliantly articulated? That notion of it would change the attitude towards what makes life valuable. When you add that to George's line about it would kill hope, or it would diminish one of the great human engines, the drive to survive, the engine of hope. You marry those two things together and you completely understand why Edward Lee and Diane Abbott are worried that we're just moving a little bit too quickly, Alison. Yes.
With all respect, I mean, I understand. But the other thing, I lost a much beloved sister-in-law in exactly the same way as you lost your friend. And she lived to the very end as herself, exactly as your lovely friend clearly did. But the thing that she worried about most was not about how she was going to die. It was about the people that she was leaving behind.
Yes.
At end of life, mostly people worry about their loved ones.
Yes, they do. And I mean, what influence that has on people is impossible to know in advance. And it takes us back to that paragraph about looking at your children and thinking all the money that's going on my social care could be buying them a house. And so you feel you're almost pressuring yourself. We've listened to the worries about people being pressured by others, but the pressure you put on yourself. So, Alison, thank you. So that's half time. That's 10:30. And what we haven't addressed, and what we may not address today, but just for anyone who hasn't listened to previous discussions on this programme about this issue, a categorically crucial constituent of all of this is the idea of anybody telling someone who wants to die that they can't, which is how it sits currently. And that speaks to autonomy, that speaks to independence. You know, if you're particularly, as the Dignitas Clinic in Switzerland has made clear, if you lack the wherewithal to take your own life, or you don't want to do it in a way that would involve yourself being discovered by loved ones or relatives, at the moment you are denied that option. And that can be construed as an assault upon something very precious as well, just as George described an assault upon hope itself, and Alison describes an assault upon our very concept of what gives a life value. 10:31 is the time. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:35 is the time. I'll be joined by another of the great figures of the new Labour movement to discuss the passing of John Prescott at 11:45. Alastair Campbell will be on the programme. Gordon Brown on with Nick earlier. Peter Mandelson also in our bulletins, having spoken to other colleagues. And at 10:45, which limits the amount we've got left for this conversation, although I'm sure we'll return to it, Professor Anthony King will be with us to discuss the ramifications of not just the decision to let Ukraine fire UK missiles, long-range missiles into Russia, but also now the reports that it has happened and what that is likely to change, if anything. I think Keir Starmer currently making a little tribute to John Prescott in the House of Commons and sharing his remarks on COP26 and G20, two of the big international conferences that he has visited in the capacity as Prime Minister in the last couple of weeks. 10:36 is the time. Before we go to Anne, who's in Barnet, this from Jim, which offers a very powerful counter to some of what we have heard already. I'd like to take a moment, he writes, to politely disagree with your undoubtedly sincere first caller. Look at that politeness. It'll never catch on. Actually, it will catch on. If you find the toxicity and unpleasantness of Twitter unbearable, then I can tell you for now, at least, that the new platform, newish platform, alternative platform, Blue Sky, is a model of the kind of good manners and polite disagreement that Jim is engaging in here. You can find me on there at Mr. James OB, exactly the same as my Twitter handle. But Blue Sky, so far, so lovely, actually. He goes on, there are many aspects of the human condition that we legislate against in an attempt to attain civilization. As a species, we are territorial. We fight, steal, and rape. We create laws in an attempt to be better than our evolutionary disposition. I simply cannot comprehend why we continue to allow prolonged suffering when we have it in our gift to prevent it. So I told you that it would be close to impossible to get a completely clear bead on this. And, you know, while the last lady was talking about the value that we place on life, I heard Donald Trump's nephew in my ear talking about how Donald Trump questioned why their disabled son needed to live at all. You know, that attitude isn't just prevalent at the moment, it's making its way back into the White House. 10:37 is the time, and I think he spoke to Tom Swarbrick recently, didn't he, the nephew concerned? 10:38 is the time. Back to the phones and the question of what are your worries. Anne is in Barnet. Anne, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I picked up the phone because you asked about somebody who'd witnessed an assisted suicide, and I have, of a very close relative in another country. Okay. It was the USA. The law there is a very well-drafted law. I am actually a lawyer. It is very similar to the draft bill that we have before Parliament here, with the exception is there's no High Court judge involved, but otherwise the criteria for allowing assisted suicide is very similar. In particular, that to pressurise anybody into going through with it is a criminal offence.
Right.
I was over in America visiting my terminally ill relative who ticked all the boxes. She was terminally ill.
Yes.
She had 6 months given. She'd seen 2 doctors, 2 so-called independent doctors, and I have a big issue with this because we cannot pressurise doctors to participate in this. So the only doctors you're going to get who agree to participate in certifying that a person is of sound mind in order to make that decision to end their lives are those who are prepared to do so.
Those who are comfortable with the very practice, the very principle.
Exactly.
Yes, I hadn't thought of that before.
It's very important because there were two so-called independent doctors. The first doctor my mother spoke to, and this was during the pandemic, so it was on the telephone, yes, which didn't help. But my other, I just said who it was now, but my other relative said, well, she spoke to him, but she got it wrong. In other words, not what he wanted to hear.
Right.
So a younger relative was very keen for this to go ahead.
There's
no money involved. It's not a question of money.
So was it compassion then, or?
No.
What?
It was, she's in our property and taking up space and time and worry, and I want it to end.
So you feel that your relative's motivation was self-interest, really, and removing the burden of your mother's care from their life?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
They would probably deny that, but we're not here to relitigate that particular argument.
There are complications in that our family specialises in long-term grudges and refusing to speak to each other for decades, so I'm very keen to not to let that go down the generations.
Yes, I bet.
So I have kept good relationships.
Okay, but that is your profound conviction. That's your deep belief that that's what was happening here.
Well, absolutely. Said in terms, because I was there for many, many weeks, living through it all, and with the patient, and she was not able to get out of bed, but she was able to read, watch television, listen to music, talk to people, take visitors, enjoy having her dogs around, enjoy the view, and just so far as she was concerned, she had no settled desire to end her life, which is one of the criteria. Right. She had no desire whatsoever. She knew that she was not going to get out of bed again, but she was actually not in pain because of drugs. She was enjoying life.
And yet she
it was her life.
And she opted to end it because you feel of the pressure that was being applied to her from without.
No question. Yeah. Absolutely no question.
And the legislation didn't save her. And part of the problem is...
Who's going to police what goes on in the home?
Yeah.
Who's going to police that?
Yeah, I guess if I were advocating for the bill, I'd suggest that the role of the High Court judge in the process...
he's not going to come. He or she's not going to come.
But he's not going to come around the house, is he? Or come around the hospital to double check. And I don't know. Anne, thank you.
It's a drip effect.
It's hard to argue against this. And whether or not the legislation can be rendered watertight or tighter, I do not know, but you have to think that probably the more time and energy that is expended on it, the more likely it is that some of these fears could be reduced or removed. But that's an incredible story. I'm so sorry that you had to go through that. Did you forgive me if I'm prying, but did you try and intervene in the other direction?
Yes, of course.
Yes, okay.
And there, of course, there were a lot of discussions, and the patient said, I might go through with it, but I want to choose the time. Another relative was saying, well, her quality of life is hopeless, but it's her life and her quality, and she was actually enjoying bits of it, and, her decision. So we keep hearing, oh, well, it's the patient's decision, but you can tear away at that decision. You can influence that decision by subtle means if you're family members.
Of course you can, yeah.
And we haven't even added in, there was no...
That's okay.
Right, there was no...
I hope it's not a client. You could be billable.
I'm retired. There was no financial motive at all, but when you add in the potential for that,
yes,
and you look at the way people behave badly over wills, inheritance, aged relatives.
It is not difficult to believe that they would behave badly in this sort of context if the prize was glittering enough, and of course some of the stuff that Anne refers to, the prizes don't even have to be that big to bring out the very worst in us. Anne, thank you. There is only one writes Jonathan, there is only one really serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. Quoting Albert Camus, from the myth of Sisyphus, unless I'm very much mistaken. I think, goes on Jonathan now, not Albert Camus, that we've entered an era of understanding things that we once thought were fundamentally human are not really fundamentally human. He cites gender, sexuality, and even life itself. I have come to accept that there are people who want to die, and the best that we can do is give them the room to finalise that decision. It need not be, there's the suicide room, knock yourself out, but the option is available. However, do you want to talk about it first? And I can't see a way through those two positions, the one that Anne has just described, drawing upon personal experience, and the one that Jonathan articulates, drawing upon the absurdist philosophy of Albert Camus. I can't see how you get through that, because one is about principle and the other is about practicality. One is about principle and one is about human behaviour. Can you create this laboratory condition for morality where you can be 100% sure that the things Anne described would not happen? Right now, 10:45, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th time we've discussed this, right now at 10:45 today, I don't think you can.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:48 is the time. WhatsApp, like the man said, or a text to 84850, or a message to Blue Sky. The three best ways to get your words in front of me at the moment. Long may it continue. Some words in front of me this morning give rather serious cause for pause. Front of the Times puts it probably simplest. Ukraine launches British missiles deep into Russia. The long-range Storm Shadows used for the first time to take out a command post in Kursk. Photographs showing fragments of metal with the word Storm Shadow stenciled on them were published on Telegram by Russian military bloggers. They claimed they were found by residents in the village of Marino. The Ukrainian media reported that the missiles may have targeted an underground command post manned by North Korean and Russian officers. Professor Anthony King is the chair of war studies at the University of Exeter and has proved himself a very helpful guide through matters involving the conflict in Ukraine over the course of its, over all of it, really. And he joins me again now. I'll start with the question that probably makes me sound silly, Anthony, but how important is this, both militarily and, I suppose, politically?
Militarily, and good morning, by the way. Thanks for having me. Militarily, significant at a kind of operational level. The use of the US ATACMS and the British Storm Shadows in that deep terrain bordering Ukraine, the striking of command posts, logistic hubs will be significant in slowing down Russian operations in Ukraine. So it has a military significance, but not a decisive one. Right. Politically, it is significant because it raises the levels of tension between Putin, the Kremlin, and the West, though I am not deeply concerned by those increased tensions. I don't think they're quite as catastrophic as some of the reportage just made out. You
mean the notion of Putin retaliating against the UK in a more substantive way?
Yes, I thought the articulation of a new nuclear kind of doctrine early on this week was interesting. And there was some reportage which was quite sort of terrified about that. I see it in a more sanguine way, namely that it is serious. They are a nuclear power. I see that that nuclear change of nuclear doctrine more as a deterrent threat to European NATO, yes, not to provide increased weapons. And he's done it every single time. What I do think will happen, and where there will be increased political and military tension, I think the retaliation will be sabotage attacks on the West, which have already happened. And indeed, I interpret the sabotage attacks in the Baltic Sea yesterday and the day before probably as a response to this. And I see those increasing. And sadly, I just think that Russia's response will be increased bombardment of Ukrainian cities and their civilian critical national infrastructure.
It's important to remember, not for you, I know you know, but for other people, that Russia has been free to throw the kitchen sink at Ukraine since hostilities began. And so Does this get filed? I know that John Healey and Keir Starmer were waiting for Joe Biden's say-so on this. The British government has been prepared to make these sort of strikes for some time. But does it run the risk of looking a little too late in the context of the bigger picture?
I think so. And I think many commentators think that. And the other thing is, what precipitated this decision by the US? So various US commentators, military professionals, military experts have been, pressurizing the Biden administration to provide these weapons for 2 years. Why has he done it now? Well, it seems that he's been precipitated by the Trump presidency, where he's thinking, literally from January, all support for Ukraine could stop. And it seems like a panicked attempt to try and create some space and leverage for President Zelensky and Ukraine in the face of a really disastrous withdrawal of US support. It may not happen, that withdrawal.
Sure.
But 2 months, how many missiles are going to be provided? Well, the reportage is they've got 50 ATACMS, these Army tactical air missile systems now. They'll probably get another 50. It's not a war-winning, that kind of, even if they had hundreds, it wouldn't win the war in and of itself. But it's not operationally insignificant. As I say, they will target headquarters. They will target logistic supply dumps around Belgorod, around Kursk. That will slow Russian operations and inflict significant losses on the Russian infrastructure, command and logistic infrastructure. It's not going to mean that Ukrainian troops roll through the Donbass and into Crimea. That is just not militarily possible, even with this uptake, and especially with 2 months to go until Trump takes over, or a month and a half till he takes over.
So ammunition depots, air bases, oil refineries deep inside Russia. So all of that supply line.
I don't think. I think oil supplies probably not, because there'll be quite a lot of civilian. I think one of the other things about the nuclear threat, I think that was a messaging to Biden, which is, okay, you're going to strike with your weaponry in Russia, make sure they're military targets, because anything else is potentially moves us towards a nuclear threshold. Yeah. So I think that the US will be very careful that they are completely military and nothing else. But of course, that allows the Ukrainian to use their weaponry, their drones, their rockets, to hit supporting dual-use structures, railway interchanges, which are very important for the Russians in terms of logistic, oil supply, as you say, the Kerch Bridge, etc. So it opens up space, but probably too little, too late is the answer.
And again, for the benefit of people listening, but obviously not for you, Anthony, until this point, Ukraine was prevented from really firing anything beyond the constraints of its own border. So final question.
Yes.
Is there another notch on this dial that Joe Biden could turn before he quits the field?
I don't think so, realistically. And I'm not sure, there could be a greater provision of air defence, a greater provision of these offensive weapons in terms of numbers. But I don't think there's many places in terms of actual equipment. Because what is clear, NATO, US, NATO, UK are not going to participate in the fighting itself. It is, it's a nasty phrase, but it is a proxy war that we are supporting a partner. We are not a combatant in this war. And I don't see any appetite within any Western capital, certainly not after Trump's taken over, to actually, and I don't think any commentator would want that to happen, to be a NATO war against Russia. So I think there's a quantity of weaponry that's an issue now, but I think in terms of the actual armoury that's been provided, I can't see anything absolutely additional that would be decisive. Indeed, nothing will be decisive, because the key weakness of the Ukrainian armed forces is their actual organisation, structure, expertise, the numbers of recruits, which is deeply concerning. The fact that they can't mobilise enough young people to actually fight. And that will be where the war is, where the war is won and lost, but also where the peace, the kind of peace distribution that we get, hopefully next year, maybe the year after.
Professor Anthony King, Chair of War Studies at the University of Exeter, thank you. The time is approaching 10:57. Back to our conversation about assisted dying, about legislation, about concerns and warnings from the longest-serving male and female MP, one a Tory, one Labour, about the speed with which this is travelling. And what will be the last word, I think, to James, who's in Southampton. James, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Great first name, by the way. Long-time listener.
Get on with it.
Thank you for having me on.
You're welcome.
Well, I wanted to tell you that last night I was actually in Parliament at an event with MPs, talking to them about this bill and scrutinising it. So the idea that it's not being scrutinised is quite bizarre to me. I've been campaigning for a change in the law since my terminally ill mother went to Dignitas in Switzerland in 2019. And I had the horrendous moral impasse to grapple with in that I was working for the police at the time. So not only was I facing potential investigation and prosecution, but very likely would have lost my livelihood and my career regardless of the outcome of that, because with police officers, you have two bites at the cherry. We're held to a higher standard than normal members of the public, quite rightly. But that meant that ultimately I had to wave goodbye to Mum on my front doorstep of my family home. And she died some 600 miles away, having travelled on her own whilst terminally ill. And that was the most difficult decision I've ever had to take, despite being a professional decision taker.
Yes.
That was the worst situation in my life.
I'm so sorry.
Well, thank you. I mean, if we're going to consider what a change in the law might mean, we have to also consider what the current status quo is, and it's a terrible mess. Not changing something is choosing to keep things as they are now. Well, yes. As things are today, a blanket ban does not do what people are concerned that a change in the law will do. So a blanket ban actually forces people to take matters into their own hands. They are scared, like I was. My family members were scared of potential prosecution for assisting suicide. Well, what does that mean? It's completely unclear with a current blanket ban. No one really knows what it means. The CPS themselves, have issued advice that prosecution for compassion is not in the public interest. And of all of the cases that have come across the DPP's, the Director of Public Prosecution's desk in the last few years, none of them have been decided to be prosecuted because it's compassionate assistance, but that's so unclear, and that is of
and it would remain,
comfort.
That's a very, very good and important point. To wonder what the alternative would be to the legislation that is under discussion. Just out of interest, what was the feeling last night about the likelihood of the bill getting through?
Well, generally the feeling is actually quite positive. That there is this worry that it's being rushed through, but that's seen as actually quite bizarre. Certainly in the four walls of Parliament last night, because
it's the 18 days that Abbott and Lee are concerned about. The gap of 18 days between the publication of the bill and the first vote being too short, and the fact that so many MPs are new and unfamiliar with Commons procedures. So it's not a suggestion that there hasn't been any scrutiny. It's just a suggestion of alacrity.
And last night, James, there were several MPs in the room listening to people far cleverer than I, the ex-Director of Public Prosecutions, KCs, giving their legal view on the bill. And the consensus was this is 46 pages of extremely tightly drafted legislation with the tightest scope and safeguards of any legislation in the world for assisted dying. We have a very narrow scope, and the idea and the challenge or the worry that this is a slippery slope, or as one of your first callers described it, a complete cliff edge, and that it will open the floodgates, is completely sensationalist, and I'm afraid misinformed. Our jurisdiction and our parliamentary process for legislating is completely different to the likes of Canada. This bill will be the bill, if it's passed, for this parliamentary period. Any challenges by courts to change the scope will not be entertained by the courts. It's very black and white. It's this scope or it's nothing, and that's what we're talking about with this bill.
I'm so glad that you were listening today, and it must have been quite a difficult listen for you to hear people sort of lining up to make points that you refute completely and are better qualified perhaps to, well, not perhaps, you're certainly better qualified to do that than I am. But I'd also like to say I'm so sorry that you're in such a strong position to comment on this because of your own personal experiences.
I mean, just one final point. We have to consider that a blanket ban just isn't working. It's not working for me and my family. It meant that Mum had to die 600 miles away. She was terminally ill and she was going to die. She was suffering unbearable pain from a disease that was killing her. This isn't about her being suicidal. She wanted to live.
Yes.
She wanted to carry on. I wanted her here.
But it was taken
I wanted to hold her hand at the end of her life, but I couldn't. I had to say goodbye to her, and our last few days together were reduced to phone calls and text messages, and that's the reality of the current state. And that's what we have to base our arguments around when we're considering how we should better ourselves as a society and introducing legislation to provide safeguards where none currently effectively exist has to be a step forward in the right direction.
That's brilliantly put. And in fact, I think anyone like me wondering why you chose to dedicate so much of your energy to this issue after losing your mum, I think you've just answered that question as well obliquely. So thank you again, James. The time is 11:02.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 6 minutes after 11. It's Thursday. Mystery Hour on the way. We'll speak to Alastair Campbell about the passing of his former colleague and friend, John Prescott. And we'll get stuck in next to a very strange story. A story that I think 2 years ago I'd have been far too frightened to go near. I don't know what happened. And I want you to tell me what you think happened. We refer to the discovery today, or the report yesterday, that the family of Captain Tom, still described in The Sun today as an NHS fundraising hero, trousered or pocketed, depending on your tabloid favourites, £1.5 million from a book deal and gave none of it to charity. We will never know who knew what when. So all you can say with confidence is that the Charity Commission has found that this money was pocketed by the family of Captain Tom. A £1.4 million advance paid to the private company for Captain Tom's memoir on the understanding that a contribution would be made to his charity. There was a gin deal upon which they made well over £100,000 and gave £8,900 to charity. The Sun writes this morning, the couple hoodwinked the public by promising royalties to the charity from its merchandise website. The daughter, blocked from paying herself a £150,000 salary as CEO of the charity, took £85,000 a year and reimbursed her own firm with £80,000 in costs from the foundation. So one cannot put too fine a point on it. The daughter of Captain Tom Moore was filling her boots on an industrial scale with money that was being paid by the public on the understanding that that money would make its way to charities or indeed to the NHS. The Times goes into even more detail. The family of Captain Sir Tom Moore gained significant financial benefit from links to a charity set up in his name. It found the report by the Charity Commission into the Captain Tom Foundation found, quotes, serious, end quotes, repeated misconduct by his daughter, Hannah Ingram Moore, and her husband, Colin. It said they rejected a publisher's offer to give a slice of a book advance worth almost £1.5 million to NHS charities together, insisting that the money went instead directly to their company. They implied that donations from book sales would be made to the foundation, but no money was given. The Commission said the public would understandably feel misled. You're familiar probably already with the planning application for a spa that they made in the name of the foundation, despite the fact that it was on their own land. They claimed they'd made a mistake because they were both, quotes, busy undertaking global media work, end quotes. They've already been disqualified from being charity trustees for 10 and 8 years, respectively. And David Holdsworth, the chief executive of the Commission, said, sadly, however, the charity set up in his name has not lived up to that legacy of others before self. Our inquiry report details repeated failures of governance and integrity. Now, part of the problem here is that if you had voiced any concerns whatsoever about what was going on at the time, when Captain Tom was in his pomp, when he was appearing with enormous regularity on all media outlets, if you had dared to suggest that it all seemed to be, well, not unlike the last hour actually, it all seemed to have gathered a very, very big momentum very, very quickly. And is everybody 100% confident that this is all kosher? If I had asked that question on the radio, I would have been absolutely pilloried. I'd have been lynched. It probably, given when it was, it probably would have made the papers. Radio host questions probity of Captain Tom's charity or whatever. Just you know that's true. I can't even remember whether it probably would have been on the front page. Actually, I'd have had people standing outside, waving placards, calling for me to be fired, like Nadine Dorries once did. And I don't think. Well, I did feel at the time that it was possibly too good to be true. That it was a bit weird, the genesis of the story. But that was a journalistic thing rather than a altruistic thing. I just remember thinking, hang on, these people are marketing professionals and they've seen an opportunity. But why wouldn't that just be an opportunity to raise huge amounts of money for the NHS? You don't like to think the worst of people, however much evidence people give you constantly that you should think the worst of them. But there was something going, I can't remember anything quite like it. I can't remember anything quite like it in terms of what I would call a fever, a public fever. It's an amazing book by Deborah Mogach called Tulip Fever. And it details how, for reasons that are never really properly understood, in Holland a couple of 100 years ago, tulip bulbs suddenly became items of unbelievable value. The right bulb would be worth more than a house. And then suddenly the bubble burst. So the entire population got caught up in this fever, I would call it, like a human fever. And I think this is quite similar. Liam says he saw people on Facebook would review bomb the businesses of anybody who questioned any element of this story. There's going to be probably a little bit of this. Karen says a little bit of retrospective vindication, and we've got no way of knowing whether you really did smell a rat at the time, although Karen tells me she remembers feeling really uncomfortable whenever he was plonked in front of the camera, or when he did that song with Michael Ball. He was clearly being used. And Jamie reminds me it's not tulip fever, it was known as tulip mania. Alastair says, I was highly suspicious at the time. It was all as disingenuous as clapping for carers. Well, this is quite interesting. Daniel in Penrith said, Captain Tom's daughter may have filled her boots during COVID, but so did many friends of the Tories. Let's not pick on her alone. Let's round them all up. Well, there are plans to look into, I think it's underway already, looking into the corruption that allegedly went on during this period at governmental sort of levels. I'm already seeing some whining, and I use that word advisedly, about the cost of the COVID inquiry. Look out for that. That's going to grow. They'll start sort of like they did Kildorf Leveson, remember? That was an inquiry into them. So there'll be some whining about the cost of the COVID inquiry. I'm not going to play the song, and I'm not sure that that's a suggestion that you've made in entirely good faith, George. But I want you to have a crack at explain someone who missed it completely. All right? So a military veteran started walking up and down his garden in order to raise money for a local hospital. Fast forward 4 years, and it turns out that his daughter made millions of pounds out of people who wanted to support him on his charity fundraising. I want you to tell me what happened to... why did we get so... What would be the best... What could you compare it to? I've gone for tulip mania, but there'd be something else as well, wouldn't there? Like when a human being becomes a vessel, a receptacle, into which we pour way, 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 way more than that human being can be personally responsible for. He became like a focal point. For what? 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. I mean, the story's hideous in all sorts of ways. The spa that they built, having claimed it, that had to be knocked down again because they hadn't got the proper permission. So, there's an aerial photograph in one newspaper today of a building site, a destroyed locale. Commission also disputed a claim by Ingram Moore that she was paid £18,000 for appearances in a personal capacity at the Virgin Media O2 Captain Tom Foundation Connector Rewards. While she received £18,000, only £2,000, separate from that sum, was donated to the charity. They were criticised for, we've mentioned the planning application. The block was demolished earlier this year after they lost an appeal against the Central Bedfordshire Council. So they spent a ton of money on building something that they then had to knocked down again. They set up another company to host an online store for Captain Tom merchandise and arranged deals to sell Captain Tom branded gin and rosé. The report concludes that there was, quotes, serious and repeated instances of misconduct and or mismanagement. But none of this could have happened if because we're all guilty here, none of this could have happened if we hadn't created something that now looks bonkers. What was it? What did we do? What happened? How do you explain this? Bizarre. I'd say close to unique phenomenon. What happened to us? Not to them. I think they saw pound, I don't know how soon into the process they started seeing pound signs in their own eyes. I don't know how much the poor fella knew about what his daughter was up to, and we'll never know. I'm not sure I want to. But what the hell happened? Seriously. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Well, what on earth happened that we could have all contributed to an ecosystem in which these people could do these things? Because you read it now and you think, they did what? And yet at the time, if anybody had said, this is just a bit, don't at me, but this is all a little bit over the top, isn't it? I mean, fair play to the fella, but can we all just calm down a bit, maybe, and have a proper look at what the family are up to and how he's ended up in this position? I mean, hit the numbers now, you will get through. I just want proper attempts at explaining what happened to us all. That's why I like the Tulip Mania thing. What happened to us? What happened to us all? And I'm going to get a million messages now. Clay, I knew all along. There's one here saying, I don't even believe he did laps in his garden. So let's not go there yet. Let's look at what did happen and the role that we all played in it. And obviously, as a member of the media, we're probably a little bit more complicit in this than anybody else. But that is the killer question. What happened? Actually, I've done it wrong, haven't I? Here's the question that you might not like the phraseology. What happened to you? 0345 6060 973. How did you get so caught up in this when, looking back, we should really have smelt a rat a lot earlier than we did? So what happened to you? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. It's 11:18.
James O'Brien on LBC.
20 minutes after 11. I'm still a bit nervous of finding any fun in this because, there was a lorry. I don't know if you saw this. It went viral on social media after Captain Tom passed away. There was a lorry that had covered the whole of the back of it, like a big supermarket delivery lorry sized truck. You know the sort I mean? And the entire back of the lorry was transformed into a portrait with a little rainbow caption across the bottom saying R.I.P. Sir Tom, 30th of April 1920 to the 2nd of February 2021. And it's an indication of how extraordinary the public's relationship with this story, not with this man, but with this story became. And I want you to tell me what you think happened, as if almost you were explaining it to someone who's only learnt about the story today as a consequence of discovering that his daughter kept £1.5 million worth of book cash, 90 grand in gin profits, and demanded 150 grand a year to run the actual charity. Dan's on quite good form today. He says, no one smelt a rat, James, as we were all wearing face masks. Maggie points out that during COVID we felt we were in a rudderless ship and he became a sort of rudder. And Nassim says, we got too excited, thinking there might be some good in the world when all that bad stuff was happening. And Brian goes for TikTok. 2 words happened, James. TikTok. Stupid people believe anything they see on that app these days. If you gave money to them, you've only got yourselves to blame. Listen, he still raised a hell of a lot of money that did go to the NHS, but these were like the side projects, the book deals, the gin, the merch. And you cannot tell me that there is anyone out there who actually enjoyed that song. It's Brian in Kilburn there, not in any danger of choking on the milk of human kindness today. 22 after 11 is the time. Maria is in Liverpool. Maria, what the hell happened?
James, I think it's the goodness of the human spirit responding to the goodness of the human spirit.
Do you?
And yeah, I do.
Well, what about, okay, before we all choke on the goodness of the human spirit, if you had said so, if you'd come on this show, let's not use you, let's use me. If I'd said something like, fair play to the fella for doing all the walking, but is anyone else a little bit uncomfortable with the way this story is developing? Where do you think the goodness of the human spirit would have been in the response to that at the time?
But no, we didn't know that then. And what's happened is a couple of rogue people, a couple of crooks have got in on the action. I mean, that's the story, isn't it?
Well, they're not accused of any criminality, although they have, of course, been disqualified from running charities. But did you not feel at any point that this was all sort of out of control?
No, because I'll tell you why. We had a situation in Liverpool where Zoe's place was about to close.
I remember. I saw Liam Thorpe's coverage in the Echo. It was a fantastic story, this.
It was. And the people of Liverpool and other benefactors raised, I think it was £5 million.
Yes.
So that the new
keep it
building
open
could go ahead.
Yeah.
And the children and the parents who need respite could get it. Now, there's the goodness of the human spirit. How do we know that somebody on the board of trustees isn't siphoning off money? Where does this stop? You've either got to believe that you believe in a good cause, and that good cause at the time was the NHS.
So you're not feeling any of what I'm feeling about the kind of sense of hang on a minute, what if this and what if that? You just sort of it was wonderful, and what a shame that the legacy has been polluted. But it was his own daughter, and the whole thing was set up by her. She was the one on the phone to the local paper saying, my dad's wandering up and down the garden. When do we think the pound signs appeared in her eyes?
That's irrelevant.
Is it, though?
To me,
is it?
Yeah, it is irrelevant. Because, James, if you carry on with that attitude, if the people of Liverpool had had that attitude, there'd be no Zoe's place now.
Yeah.
At what point do you
No, that's not... No,
oh,
I'm going to argue with you politely. Do you mind?
I don't mind, but as long as you don't mind if I argue back.
I would be offended if you didn't. Just don't shout about how much you hate me, all right? I've already filled that. I've already ticked that box.
No, I listened to that.
I've already ticked that box this week. That's more like it.
I love you to bits.
That's more like it. So no, what you are describing with regard to Zoe's place, I followed that story quite closely, as I mentioned, largely due to the work Liam Thorpe and his colleagues at the Liverpool Echo have been doing. And it doesn't bear comparison with this, because the whole point about this phone-in is how weird this story was. There's nothing weird about the Zoe's Place story. It's an announcement that a hospice is going to close, an extraordinary public effort to keep it open, a brilliantly and well-regulated fundraising campaign that succeeds in keeping the place open. At no point were you sitting there thinking, hang on a minute, he's singing a song with Michael Ball now. The world's gone absolutely bonkers. So it doesn't work. You can't use this as a siphon of the goodness of the human spirit, because and then claim that if you weren't a little bit uncomfortable about some elements of it, then you've got no charitable impulse at all. This is a unique event, Maria, and uniquely weird, I would say. I
completely disagree with you, James, and
right,
I'll tell you why. When people gave that money, they gave it in good faith that it would go to the NHS. When people bought the merchandise or did what they did, I don't believe at any point did anyone stop and think, hang on, she might be a fraudster or an alleged
not a
fraudster.
fraudster. Just to clarify, no criminality is alleged here. It's a kind of betrayal of presumed trust that we're describing.
Okay.
A betrayal of presumed... And I can tell you that people did question it. People were suspicious. They were just too frightened to say so in public, which is the other bit of the story that I'm interested in. So why do you think people would have been too frightened to say anything in public at the time? Because
I've got no idea.
Come off it.
But
you must do. It's because they'd have got lynched. They'd have got lynched. They'd have got bounced around the newspapers like a mouldy old squash ball.
No, Jane. I've never seen a mouldy old squash ball, Jane. So.
Nor have I, actually. I don't know where that came from.
Can you post a picture?
Show me your mouldy old squash balls. My first band was called the Mouldy Old Squash Balls. I used to play bass for. Maria, thank you for kicking things off. That's what it is. That's what it is. I think it's the journalist in you, says Dan. I'm wondering why, as a journalist, you didn't say something for fear of backlash. I'd politely and with love ask for an explanation. Well, I don't know that I was particularly suspicious at the time, certainly when it all started. Dan, thank you for your polite inquiry. But what would have been gained with no evidence to come out and say this is all a bit sus, this is all a bit over the top, this is all a bit strange, this is all gone a bit bonkers, hasn't it? Why do you hate war veterans? You're a traitor. You get called a traitor in this country these days for suggesting that Jeremy Clarkson is not being entirely honest about his motivations for joining protests against farmers' inheritance tax. What do you base that on, O'Brien? Well, things he said in the past about why he bought a bloody farm. You're treasonous. You're a traitor. That reminds me, we've got an unhinged headline which speaks directly to what I've just described. In fact, should we do it now? Should we do it now? Let me see if let's do it now.
James O'Brien on LBC.
And that's what we're asking, really, is what the hell happened to us all? I mean, even that song, I don't know what your reaction to is now, but at the time, probably a bit dewy-eyed. Probably a bit, oh, bless him. Bless his cotton socks. And now we know more, even if we hadn't discovered the amount of cash that his daughter was trousering from various side projects. That would probably still feel very strange in retrospect. Humans are a very strange bunch. 11:32 is the time. For example, today's missing word round. Blank artwork sells for $6.2 million in New York City. What do you think the missing word is there? Blank artwork sells for $6.2 million in New York City. I'll give you a clue. It's the second time in this week that this particular thing has turned up in the news. Not the same thing, but enough already. The word. It's the second time this week that the word has turned up in the news. The last time it involved a Swedish minister, I think, or a Norwegian minister. And if that's not a big enough clue for you, then frankly, I'm wasting my time. 11:33 is the time. Pat's in Huddersfield. Pat, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. I think we're a nation of hypocrites, if I will put it that way.
Yeah.
Because looking at what the Thomas More family has donated is more than what any amount that the children.
No, they didn't donate anything, mate. People gave money to the charity. That was the public. They didn't donate money. They kept money that people.
The money that was donated by the public, was it not donated to the NHS?
No, that was, but it wasn't the family that donated. It was you and me and Keith.
So why did you not donate directly to the NHS and instead of giving it to the family?
Because they set up things like book deals and
that's why we're hypocrites. Now we're going after the innocent children who are helping to run this charity.
No, you've misunderstood the story, which is probably my fault. But they've been disqualified from running charities by the actual charity commission because they're not innocent.
Why is the actual charity commission did disqualify Oxfam, the BBC Children in Need CEOs? How much?
Because they didn't keep all the money for themselves.
Oh, come on, James. We all know what is happening.
You've lost me now, Pat.
Yeah. I honestly, I think we just.
So when did the BBC Children in Need apply to build a spa in their own back garden and have to knock it down because A, they didn't have any planning permission, and B, they'd claimed that it was going to be somehow part of the foundation? When did they reject a publisher's offer to give the slice of a £1.5 million book advance to charity?
That's not what I was saying. What I was telling you was, look at how.
So you don't trust any. So you don't trust any charities.
I do towards charities, but it's not to the extent. I know if I give £10, it's £2 or £3 that is going to the actual charity.
Yeah,
the remaining goes to the CEOs or the people.
Yeah, okay, so that would be applicable in the case of a well-regulated, well-run charity, albeit that I think the trustees would have something to say about such a small percentage of a donation making its way to the actual good causes. But this is neither a well-run nor a transparent charity, which is why the charity. I mean, I can't explain it anymore, Pat. But I don't want to. It's nothing worse than separating a man from a meaningless grievance. So I'll leave it there as an act of charity, for which you don't have to pay. Fraser is in Newcastle. What the hell happened, Fraser?
It's just typical for me, if you like. I think I don't know how many military charities there are, but there's more than there is military, I think. I wouldn't buy a poppy. I wouldn't buy lots of these things. I was saying to
go on.
I'm saying to your researcher, I think a lot of these donations would be female-led. I think one of the downsides of the supposed... I was going to go on to another thing. Women's independence, if you like, giving money to silly things is without thinking.
Why are you blaming it on women?
Because I bet you that's where the 80% of the charities would come from. It's women that are donating. Or businesses, right?
What? Okay.
Women are 80% responsible for buying just about everything on the planet, I believe, aren't they?
I thought the last fella had sort of pushed the envelope a bit. I've got no idea what you're talking about, Fraser.
Right. What were people doing when lockdown was around?
Yeah.
Pretty much nothing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So they were bored.
Men and women, not just women.
Yeah, men and women.
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
definitely. But
right.
I'm getting a wee bit mixed up there because what I'm saying
That's
is...
all right, mate.
I look at things like we have Poppy Month, we have Halloween Fortnight, we have Christmas Month, we have Easter Month,
right?
And who buys all the cards? Who buys all the presents? Who buys all this disposable rubbish?
Okay,
right?
Yeah.
It's women. Right? What are you laughing at? That's the truth.
It's just something about. It just went a little bit with normal men. We're just innocent men.
Right.
What? We're
No,
just
no,
not. We're
but
just you, and we're just normal men, though. We're innocent men.
No. I wouldn't say I'm normal. I've no idea about you, but you don't sound very normal to me, right?
It's just women.
Right, what's the last charity you donated to? I don't give money. I want to give money to Palestine, right? But I'm frightened to give the money to a specific cause because I don't really know who they are.
Yeah,
right.
But we're not. You can find there's fairly reliable roads to go down. And to answer your question, I made a donation to Global's Make Some Noise 2 nights ago, actually. But that's not really the point. The point is what happened to the population. I don't want to use the word hysteria, but I just did.
The minute you put military in front of any sort of charity cause, let's protect our boys, let's protect the NHS.
Yeah, that's not the military, though, is it? The NHS.
Right,
no.
but it's the same, James. It's run under the same lines.
Okay, so I think, Gary,
not so much
if you attach patriotism to a story, then it does something to us that is quite strange, and I don't know that it does. I don't think it affects.
It does to the heart of thinking, right?
Well, you said it was women a minute ago, so let's be careful that we're not conflating those two constituencies.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Let's take a real the poppy. Right. There's people who don't want to wear a poppy, and if they don't wear it, they get absolutely like.
Is this men or women?
This is men.
This is men
Football
now.
players.
Well, there's one.
Irish
James McLean. We did the phone in on this, actually. It's a shame you weren't involved.
Okay, yeah, but you stand up and say, wait a minute, I'm not wearing a poppy. Did these guys in 1914 and 1980?
I think
what choice?
Yes, so you get this abuse, even though James McLean, the footballer of whom you speak, has put his position very powerfully, talked very persuasively about what his motivation here is. But of course, in the world we inhabit, it doesn't stop people screaming abuse at him without knowing any of the details. And if you had dared to say anything vaguely critical about this whole process, this jamboree, this mania, whatever it might be, you would have come under very, very similar attack. You would have been accused of betraying our war dead and treasonous conduct. I can't let you go without challenging the idea that it would all have been women that were doing this, Fraser. It sounds. I don't know whether this is baggage that existed before you rang the programme, but I don't think this is on the women.
No, right. The fact of the matter is, all consumer goods.
I understand that. I mean, you're saying women do the shopping. I don't know that that's true anymore either. I mean, most men listening.
I'm not saying they do the shopping, but they buy.
That's shopping.
Men go shopping. I don't know. I'm not a typical man. I don't have kids, right? If I go shopping, I'm like a terrorist. I go in and I get out as quick as possible.
Yeah.
Right, and I don't buy extra stuff. I don't sit and go, oh, that would be lovely if we had the fire on and a nice glass of wine.
Yeah.
Do you know, I'm like, what? No, I need bread, butter and eggs, and I usually forget the eggs and something like that. Do you know what I mean? I forget. Yeah. Right? So, but what I'm saying is the whole world is going down we all talk about, what's the name of the thing? The world going...
The tubes?
Yes, go down the stank, right? And yet, there's not a day goes by that isn't let's remember this day, and then we all send cards.
I don't think anyone sends cards anymore, Fraser. Seriously, I got a Christmas card this morning. I probably only get about 4 this year. 20 years ago when I started here, I'd have got a couple of hundred. Anyway, thank you. Yes. What the hell happened to us? Men or women? But if you want to focus in on one, just the women or just the men, feel free to do so. Katie's in Fleet. Katie, what happened?
Oh, hi, James. I'm a big fan, and I'm feeling really nervous now because.
Can I just check? Are you one of those? Are you one of those so-called women?
Yeah. Well, do you know what? I was just listening to the last chat, thinking, well, my explanation isn't as crazy as that, and I'm probably not typical of the woman that he's describing, because I actually.
Yes.
Which I honestly I think the majority of people were just looking for kind of a moment of light in a very dark period.
Yeah.
But I personally found it all a bit of a turn-off.
Did you?
And I did. When I first saw Captain Tom, I just thought, well, that's really sweet. And then it just all kind of escalated, and the Michael Ball song I found quite tacky. Sorry, Michael.
It wasn't his best work. I'm sure Michael would agree.
It wasn't his best work, and it just all kind of snowballed, and it did feel like his family were sort of exploiting him and pushing him out into the limelight a bit. And I was a bit horrified.
Did you dare to say so? Would you have dared to say so? No.
No. And I think there was a lot of secret people like me who I sat there and thought, God, I'm becoming like really cynical and hard-bitten and negative, and so I just kept it to myself. And maybe a lot of people were like me, especially at a moment when you saw everyone in such desperate need for a bit of light. It felt really bad to kind of rain on everyone's parade. So either, there were a lot of people like me who just kept kind of quiet and thought, oh, you just become a bit cynical and hard-bitten, or maybe a lot of people were a bit gullible.
Well, if you're in my line of work, I don't think I thought there was anything dodgy going on. I just think that I thought it was a bit mad and crazy, and I got caught up in it, and then I didn't get and then I did again. It was just, whereas you were a bit above the fray throughout.
Probably from after the first bit when he was he was doing his walk. After that point, do you know what I thought? I thought, why is it that it takes this man to do that for people to care or donate money? Why aren't they doing it anyway? Why do they feel they have to have something like that sort of trawled in front of them, convince them to do something? And then it just got completely out of
it did, didn't it? It couldn't have happened if we were all going mad, weren't we, in our sheds and locked up in our homes and going for walks,
James,
and banging pans on Thursday nights.
I found that dreadful too. I feel like I'm coming out now, but I thought that was really...
Well, I think in retrospect, you were probably right, because, it was meaningless in the great scheme of things. And actually, I'm not sure that the healthcare professionals derived much pleasure from it either. I think we were doing it...
What benefit did they get from that?
Yeah, well, precisely. They just got woken up if they just finised a shift, probably, because there's some muppet next door banging a saucepan with a wooden spoon.
Exactly. But, James, I have a bit of a suspicion that we are a little bit like that as a public, because if you think about Princess Diana's death, The way in which there wasn't any particular situation there. You know, there was no kind of, we weren't all locked away from COVID, but this huge kind of momentum of grief and emotion that, and again, I felt quite bad that I wasn't at that level of grief. And then watching her children, who were children at the time, walking behind a coffin and having more, I don't know, they were more conservative. They had themselves more together than these sort of sobbing people on the side. And I just thought that was dreadful too. So I don't know what it is about.
You've got a better tuned radar than other people. That's all it is. Your radar, your kind
James.
of mawkishness radar is better tuned.
Mawkishness. That's the word.
Emotional literacy as well. I wonder whether the more emotionally literate you are in your actual life, the less likely you are to get caught up in public hysteria. Maybe. I don't know.
Well, the thing is, I will just say this, and I thank you for that, because I was feeling like I was a really cynical old cow, and you made me feel like,
on the contrary.
The radar.
Yeah, I prefer that. I think that
Thank you. But I will just say I'm frustrated, because I've been trying to get on to talk to you about Gaza, because that is something that I get very, very upset about, and my emotional radar has gone off the scale, and what I can't comprehend is how more people aren't devastated by what's happening there. And yet we're getting completely carried away by a Captain Tom song. So
I think I can help you with
understand.
that. I think it's just in a way, you've unintentionally answered that question yourself, in that it is much, much, much easier to engage with the emotions engendered by a war hero walking up and down his garden to raise money for the doctors and nurses for whom at the time we had extraordinary gratitude. And the situation in Gaza is, as you've just described, it's so, I don't want to say exhausting, because that's a first world luxury, but it just, the more you look at it, the harder it is not to look away. So, I mean, it is a simple human condition. As that carnage continues, as Israel continues to kill people in Gaza on an almost unprecedented scale, it takes something out of you to exercise your empathy, whereas it cost us nothing to support Captain Tom. No one came away from watching Captain Tom's antics with a sense of dread or fear or horror, whereas Israel's behaviour in Gaza, I'm afraid, does exactly that to almost everybody. 11:47. I wasn't expecting that conversation to take that turn towards the end, but happy that it did. After this next junction, we'll be joined by the former Director of Communications for Tony Blair when he was Prime Minister, and John Prescott was Deputy Prime Minister, because John, later Lord Prescott, has, as you've heard in the news all morning, passed away at the age of 86.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:51 is the time. You can get on your high horse, can't you, and sneer at other people's sentiments or sensibilities. But I reckon almost everybody, when they heard the news this morning of John Prescott passing away, would have thought pretty quickly of the time he thumped someone who threw an egg at him, because that's the nature of a human relationship with media. He was, of course, much, much, much more than that, and few would know that better than Alastair Campbell, former Director of Communications in Downing Street, when John Prescott was the deputy. Can you remember the first time you met him, Alastair?
I was a journalist, and back then he was a bit of a thorn in the side of Neil Kinnock quite a lot of the time, so he was had a bit of a rebellious streak. I always had a very good relationship with John, always. But yeah, we were back in the early 80s I first met John.
And what was his trajectory then through the sort of ranks of the party? How did he end up beside Tony Blair when victory finally came calling?
Well, he was always, he came from a trade union background, MP for 4 decades and more. And he was always a guy who was going to go places, I think. At that stage, a bit of an outsider, but then got into the shadow cabinet, challenged the leadership a couple of times. And by the time Tony became leader, after John Smith died, John was one of the other. John very cleverly went both for the leadership and the deputy leadership, knowing in his heart that Tony was probably going to win. And it meant that he was the elected deputy leader. And that became a really, really important relationship. People talk a lot about, TBGB, Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, and that was obviously very important. But John was an incredibly big part of the, if you like, the architecture of New Labour. He was the guy, people talk about him, I've heard a lot of the sort of commentary today, that he was the guy who was, the traditional what have you, and the trade union guy, much more old Labour. But he was the guy who coined the phrase, new Labour is traditional values in a modern setting. And that kind of, that was one that Tony felt very, very comfortable with. And sort of, for example, when we're doing the big modernising steps like changing the party constitution, John's initial instinct would be to be against why we're doing this. But then he was always persuadable if you had a really strong argument. And once he accepted an argument, he was absolutely out there, one of the best campaigners we had.
So a more thoughtful man than perhaps some of the public portrayals allow.
Yeah, definitely. Much more sophisticated, and his political instincts were extraordinary. He had really good political instincts. I think the reason why people maybe had the image of him that they did, one was the punch, which, as you say, became quite defining. It was also the fact, I remember once watching him doing an interview, and I said to him afterwards, John, that is the longest sentence I've ever heard without a verb. It had no verb in it, but you knew what he was talking about. Yeah. And he was such a massive character. I was talking to somebody reminded me today, because when at a Labour Party conference, we'd all put all the effort into Tony's speech on the Tuesday, and then John would probably be closing the conference on the Friday. And so I used to help John with his speeches, and often it was about, giving him the sort of the kind of rather risque jokes that maybe Tony didn't want to use. But John wanted to rehearse everything, and he wanted to rehearse it in a big way. So I remember one night in the Imperial Hotel in Blackpool, 3:00 in the morning, Pauline asleep in the bed next door, and it was hot in the room. So we opened the windows, and the wind was howling and rain was coming. The curtains were sort of flying around. John at this stage had a shirt on which he completely undone down to his waist, and he was doing this speech to the sea. But he didn't rehearse like I would rehearse.
That's like something out of King Lear. That's fantastic.
Well, it was. He was shouting at the sea. But he was a good orator. He was a great campaigner. The thing about being more thoughtful, I thought was very interesting today. One of the first tributes came from Al Gore, who was the vice president of the United States at the time of the Kyoto Agreement. John was absolutely fundamental to the success of those negotiations. He was a brilliant negotiator. He could keep people up all night. He would drill down on detail. He was a nightmare for interpreters. I remember once he was standing in for Tony at this big European conference, and I can remember looking at the interpreters, and at one point they were all in these cabins behind the meeting, and at one point the guy who was translating into German next to the guy who was translating into Finnish, and I remember, I'll never forget this, looking at them, and they're just going, shaking their heads, and I don't know how to do this. You couldn't translate John Prescott. He's a lovely man, and
your warmth, your affection is really coming across, for which I'm really, really grateful. Did he suffer much from snobbery, do you think, in his career?
He certainly felt he did.
Yes.
And I think sometimes he slightly overdid it. But look, he felt the class thing very, very powerfully. He always used to, I remember Nicholas Soames, Old Etonian, Churchill's grandson, all that stuff. And once in the House of Commons, because John had been a waiter, John was up on his feet, and Nicholas Soames said, "I'll have a large G&T, Giovanni." Of course, it's actually quite funny, right?
Yes.
But John really took that sort of, because he felt that, to me, that's Nicholas Soames having a bit of laugh and trying to put him off his stride. To John, it was like, you don't ever want to see me as anything other than a waiter serving people like you. I'm the bloody deputy prime minister, and you better not forget it. So he sometimes could be very prickly about the class stuff. But also, I think it's what made him a special politician. I think it's what makes Angela Rayner a special politician. It's what made Dennis Skinner a special politician.
Well, you may have preempted my final question then by referencing Angela Rayner. Do you think it is easier now for someone to make a political journey like John Prescott's, from relative poverty to the pretty much the very top of the Labour Party, or harder, or roughly the same?
I don't think John would ever say that he came from a background as poverty stricken as Angela did, which was like,
true. Yes.
Her story is extraordinary. But listen, I think another way of looking at this is actually, do we have enough people in politics now coming from working class backgrounds, and do we have enough people in Parliament? But I think John was a trailblazer in lots and lots of different ways. And I think it's great that you've got Angela Rayner there as Deputy Leader of the Labour Party. Clearly she reminds people of John Prescott in the sort of directness, in the authenticity, in the passion that comes from her politics. But John should never, ever be underestimated. I think he sometimes was underestimated as a politician. He was a serious guy, cared about his politics, and he achieved an awful lot.
And a lovely man. There's an anecdote I don't think you'll have heard before, which I shall share with you now. It's just come in from Alice, who writes, when Chumbawamba threw water at him at the 1998 Brit Awards, I wrote to him to tell him how outrageous I, a 15-year-old girl, thought it was. And he phoned my family landline to say thank you. We were watching Corrie at the time, and my mum picked up the phone and said, Alice, it's John Prescott for you.
No, I remember the Chumbawamba thing because Chumbawamba came from Burnley, and I remember he phoned me up and he said, your bloody Burnley people are chucking water at me. What are you going to do about it? John, I've got so many great memories of John, and but it's so sad. We've got David Hill's funeral tomorrow, John dying today. It's
end of an era.
Too many good ones are going.
Alastair Campbell, thank you. Alastair, of course, Director of Communications in Downing Street when John Prescott was Deputy Prime Minister. And it is coming up to 12 noon. I don't know. I met him once, John Prescott, once or twice. I think my dad had dealings with him when he was on the Hull Daily Mail. But I was with Pauline at a do when I was a gossip columnist, and we got on rather well, actually. Pauline was a lovely woman, and she was she may have just been polite, but, I was often at a loose end at those sort of events, and she was waiting for him to arrive because he was late from the Commons, so she was at a bit of a loose end as well, and we were getting on like a house on fire. And then Prescott arrived. He goes, who are you? And I went, James O'Brien, the Daily Express. Thank you very much. Have a lovely evening. And that was the end of that. It's Mystery Hour next. At least it should be. It's Thursday, right? It's 12 noon. Yes, it must be.
James O'Brien on LBC.
I don't take questions by text, as you know, but if I did, I'd take Helen in Gateshead. Question for Mystery Hour, she writes, what percentage of bought goods are purchased by women? If you know, you know. If you're tuning in just for Mystery Hour, you deny yourself some other rather special pleasures and joys by not listening to the rest of my output, particularly the last hour. This is your weekly opportunity to achieve the sort of satisfaction that you can't find anywhere else on your radio dial. Someone will ring in with a mystery, share it, and we'll explore it a little together, and then someone else will ring in with the answer, ideally. And somewhere in that process, somewhere between those two positions, magic happens every single week. So much magic that it's even spawned its own board game, which you can win by being my favourite contributor of the week. Full terms and conditions for that competition can be found at lbc.co.uk. You'll find out more about the board game and even buy one at mysteryhour.co.uk. I haven't forgotten the missing headline round. I'll deal with that before I take the first question, actually, just to get it out of the way, because it's a mystery of itself, but I think it might be a mystery that we could have a rather longer conversation. It's got a bit of a Friday afternoon feeling to it, this one. I'll tell you more in a minute. But first, I also now, I'm guaranteeing one laugh out loud moment between now and 1 o'clock, and also guaranteeing that you will know more by 1 o'clock than you do now. It may not be knowledge that you're grateful for, it may not be knowledge that you can put to any meaningful use whatsoever, and it may not be knowledge that you still have at 2 o'clock. Especially if your memory is responding to the passage of time in a way even vaguely similar to the way that mine is. But you will, by 1 o'clock, know more than you do now. So the missing word round was this. Blank artwork sells for $6.2 million in New York City. Blank artwork sells for $6.2 million in New York City. And the answer is, the missing word is, duct-taped banana. Or just banana, if you prefer. So it's an Italian artist who got some duct tape and stuck a banana to a wall, and that's the artwork. And it comes with instructions on what to do if the banana needs to be replaced. It's been eaten twice in its history already, and the new purchaser of it, someone involved in cryptocurrency, has paid $6.2 million and revealed that they are going to personally eat it as part of this unique artistic experience. I do not understand that, and there may be a phone-in on how on earth that can possibly be worth £6.2 million, but we won't be dollars, but we won't be having it today. And another a slight break with Mystery Hour tradition involving some breaking news, but I think you'd agree, particularly given the content of the last call, that is breaking news important enough to merit a little breach with Mystery Hour. I can tell you that the International Criminal Court has rejected the State of Israel's challenges to jurisdiction and issued warrants for the arrest of Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant. So an arrest warrant has been issued for the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu by the International Court charged with investigating war crimes. And, of course, the court that found there was plausible grounds for an investigation into allegations of genocide. 6 minutes after 12 is the time. Possibly more on that if we deem it necessary between now and 1, but otherwise it will be in our bulletins. Shall we get cracking on Mystery Hour? Yeah, ready? Ali's in Dartford. Ali, question or answer?
Question, James.
Carry on, Ali.
This is not that exciting, but it's not motoring, so we're sort of one notch forward already.
Yeah, that's good.
The other week I had a bit of an accident, and it was I put a cup. It was fine. It wasn't serious. Okay. I put a cup in my microwave and to heat something up, and when I went to get it, it was absolutely boiling, and it burnt my hands.
Oh no!
So my question is, it wasn't microwave safe, but a lot of my mugs are. What is the point of some of them being microwave safe and not? And what do you have to put into a mug to make it microwave safe or leave out?
Why? So did you look at it after you burnt yourself? Did you look at the bottom of it? How do you know it's not? I just presume all mugs are microwave safe.
No, they're not. They're not.
Well, clearly, you said, God, you said that with some stridence. No, they're not. No, clearly they're
Public
not.
Safety, James.
Yeah.
Public safety. People need to know.
So
it
what?
was really hot.
Yeah. So what? And did it a proper burn? Did it blister and stuff?
No, it's fine. I was just feeling a bit of a wind.
I had a terrible time with some pita bread a couple of days ago.
Oh, you've got to be careful of the steam.
Getting it out of the toaster and on the palm of my hand, not even on my fingers. I went in for a quick lick. I like to just toss it in the air as I pull it out the toaster and then catch it on a plate. But I give myself quite a mischief actually. So what makes a mug microwavable?
Yeah, or a bowl or anything, but I can't understand why they wouldn't put it in. Is it more expensive?
Why don't they just make everything microwavable and save us all a problem like the one you just What was in the mug?
Oat milk.
Really? You're not alone. I've had a message off Roddy. He says my wife did the same.
There you go.
You see? And it wouldn't be metal paint. It didn't have like gilt around the edges of it. It's just the ceramic. The ceramic is not microwave safe versus ceramics that are microwave safe.
Yes. So it isn't a silly question, is it?
No, it's not silly at all. It's not the best. It's not the best question we've ever had. But did you also? I wonder whether you did you buy a lot of Captain Tom memorabilia? I'm just checking on Fraser's theory from the last hour.
No, I bought all my mugs myself.
Yes.
I think.
Well, that proves his point. 80% of the mugs in your house, I bet, were bought by you. It's 9 minutes after 12. Thank you, Ali. Marty's in Tenerife. Marty, question or answer?
Hi, James. Hello. It's a question.
Carry on.
We're out here for a couple of week holiday, and it's beautiful. We were at a restaurant the other night, and went for a drink towards sundown. Why is it that when the sun is setting, it appears to go faster than it does throughout the rest of the day? Now, I know it doesn't actually speed up. It just seems to disappear beyond the horizon at a faster rate than it reached the horizon.
Is it because of the horizon? It's just the optical illusion, for want of a better word, because you can see the finish line. You've got something to compare it to. Whereas if the sun is in the sky, you've got nothing to compare it to. You haven't got a metric by which you can judge how fast it's moving. Whereas if it's making its way towards the horizon, so once it's begun its kind of descent, you can, if the horizon is in your field of vision at the same time, I don't know that this is an answer, but if the horizon is in your field of vision, it makes sense to me that you're going to be able to better track the passage of the sun. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
That must be it, but that must be part of the answer, because it does, unless it actually speeds up, which, as you say, is highly unlikely.
No, it doesn't.
No.
It doesn't. No, but yeah, okay, I'll take that. You can give yourself a round of applause.
I'm not going to take it. I'm going to put it because someone will know in slightly more detail. But if you think about, you're just watching something in a huge space move. And you can't really. But if you're watching it move towards something, then you're watching a space shrink. You're watching the space between the sun and the horizon shrink. Whereas otherwise, you're just watching a ball on a big screen. The screen being the sky. It's not shrinking. You're not seeing it. Your field of vision is not... Anyway, that's my answer. I can tell that you're expecting something a little better. And frankly, I don't blame you. What's the weather like? Is it all right? Is it worth it in November?
28 degrees, James.
No, really?
Yeah, nice breeze blowing. It's just beautiful.
I wouldn't think.
Absolutely gorgeous.
I wouldn't think of going at this time of year to the Canary. That's put it on my list. Thank you, Marty. Enjoy the rest of your holiday. I hope this will be among the highlights. You getting on to Mystery Hour. David is in Tooting. David, question or answer?
Question, please.
Carry on.
Thank you, James. So the question is, why is it, as an English person, watching a film that's in English language,
yes,
and if it has English subtitles, I'm still fixated on reading the subtitles?
Yeah, it's a good question, that. And people do it increasingly. Have you got any children? Do you mind me asking?
No, unfortunately not, mate.
Well, how do you know it's unfortunately? You never know. You don't know what they would have been.
Like me, then God help them.
Don't know what they would have been like. But but they watch a lot of stuff with subtitles these days, even though they don't need to. Not got any hearing difficulties or anything like that. It just adds to the experience for them. But you're right. Even if you can understand every single syllable that's been said on the screen, if the subtitles are there, your eye will be drawn to them rather than to the action on the screen.
And it really annoys me because I can't stop it.
No. Well, you can turn them off.
You can sometimes, yeah.
Well, no, you can always turn, unless you're watching something dodgy, which I don't want to know about. You can always turn the subtitles off, can't you? Although it's a right faff working out how to do it sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm not the most technological
No, you and me both.
Admit, mate.
You and me both. I like this. I wonder if it's got some relationship to the sunset question. It's about what our eyes are drawn to and the way that we sort of operate in that space. I do not know, but I like the question. David, thank you. Sunset, subtitles and mugs. All human life is here. David is in Brixton. David, question or answer?
Hi, James. Question.
Carry on.
First time
another
caller,
David. That's two Davids. Two Davids in a row. Right, yeah. Question.
Yes. I'm a first-time caller, and thanks for fighting. I'm a black Londoner. Thanks for fighting a corner.
Oh, it's a lovely thing to say.
Sometime.
Thank you, David.
Right. My question is, how come a raven can hop into a live rail and nothing happens to it?
Yeah. You mean at the underground?
No, overground.
Wombling free. Sorry.
Yeah, overground stations. Yeah.
So the live rail, if you trod on it, what would happen to you?
Well, I'll be toast.
You'd be toast, but a raven can land on it. And I think if you managed to land on it without your other foot touching the ground, wouldn't you be okay as well?
Not sure.
Because I think it's about earthing.
Okay.
But I don't know. I'm going to put it on the list.
Lovely, thank you.
No, thank you, and thank you for your kind words as well. How can birds land on live lines? And this is on a train. I think we've had the question with the overhead pylons. We've probably had it with the trains as well before, but frankly, there's no chance of me remembering. Some fella got in touch with me on Blue Sky this morning. I think he's American, to say he's started listening to the archive on Spotify where it goes back to 2012. He's got 12 years worth of Mystery Hour to look forward to. He's in clover. He's absolutely loving it. I think it's to do with being earthed, but I will allow someone else to answer that, because some weeks I feel very generous. I feel that we should let other people get the rounds of applause, and other weeks I'd hoover them all up myself. And this is one of the first weeks, not one of the second. It's 12:15.
James O'Brien on LBC.
They're my favourite moments, actually, but they're the moments that not everybody picks up on. So when Rob writes, "Wombling free," loved that, James. That makes me worthwhile. That makes me feel that it was worth coming to work today. So underground, overground, wombling free. But if you didn't get it, you didn't get it. But that's why I love live radio. We've had a couple of things lately that have really enforced the magic of live radio. We had one, arguably, in the last hour, didn't we? One or two in the last hour. But my favourite recently was the lovely lady who rang in and asked the question. And then I answered the question by saying slowly. So she said something like, "How do ants get up hills?" or "How do slugs get up hills?" And I went, "Slowly." And she went, "How do slugs?" And that, for me, was one of those moments of absolute magic. I think they're more likely to happen between 12 and 1 on a Thursday than they are during the rest of the week. But by no means, A, they're not guaranteed to happen, and B, they're not guaranteed not to happen in the rest of the show. Thank you to Gary for reminding me of another breach with Mystery Hour tradition, actually, which I'm going to throw one of my own questions into the mix. And depending on the answers to this, I was tempted earlier this week to do it as an entire topic. But why are statues so bad? Why are there so many stories about statues of famous people? I hope no one was ringing in to ask this. Let me just check the screen. Because I said I was going to, I think, or I asked you to remind me, and Gary remembered. So why does it seems more than ever? And what I'd compared it to was ancient Greece, where all the statues are incredibly anatomically accurate. Now, admittedly, I don't know for sure what Socrates or Plato looked like, or various generals immortalised forever in marble. But I'm fairly confident that the quality of statuary was higher in ancient Rome and ancient Greece than it is now. So why do we get so many stories? This week it was Harry Kane's turn. The worst ever was probably Cristiano Ronaldo. But why do we get so many stories about statues that don't look anything like their subject? All right, so that's my question on the list today. Rachel's in Stamford. Rachel, question or answer?
Question.
Carry on.
So, why is it that when you heat up sparkling water, it loses its sparkles or bubbles?
Well, I don't know. Is that a proper mystery? I
think so.
It'd just be chemistry.
I mean, the only reason I ask, well, yeah, I think so. I think it must be to do with, exciting all the particles, and the gases must then leave as it gets heated up. But, it's
yes, that's what I think it is. The particles start moving more, and therefore they're more likely the gas particles are going to make their way out of the water.
But there must be a better explanation, like a more scientific one. That's what I'm after.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Also, what are you doing heating up fizzy water?
For my throat.
For what?
When you have a sore throat. So honey, sparkling water, and a little bit of brandy.
But why do you heat it up?
It's soothing. It's more soothing on the throat.
So there's still a bit of bubble in it?
There is, but not much.
And that's the thing, because
it gives it like an itch.
I've never heard that. I've never heard that before. So you're talking about a hot toddy, really, aren't you? So whether you use brandy or whiskey, a bit of honey. I'd put a bit of lemon in it when I make them as well, actually. But you do. You've been taught that using fizzy water has an effect, and therefore you've noticed that it gets less fizzy when you heat it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you live and learn. I've never heard that before. But I shall do my best to find out for you. 0345 6060 973. I'm more interested in the bit that wasn't asked as a question, which is why would fizzy water have a better effect on a particularly throat than flat water? But that's not the question we're asking. You can ring in and ask that next week. 20 minutes after 12 is the time. David is in Belfast. 3 Davids so far. Is that a record, Keith? 3 Davids. It's only 20 past 12. This one's in Belfast. David, question or answer?
Hi, James. How's it going?
I'm good.
So, why is it when cats, particularly on ledges and tables, like to put or knock things off?
Do they?
Yeah, well, mine does. I can't speak for all cats, but I know anecdotally a lot of other people tend to do it. So
you mean they push a thing off a thing?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I like that question. Keith nodding. Yes,
I think a lot of cats.
I've got 3 cats. I've not noticed this before.
Yeah, well, your cat probably doesn't eat tomatoes, so maybe it's just my cat. Maybe it's
your cat eats. No, there's a whole genre. Apparently, the internet is full of videos of cats pushing things off tables and worktops.
Yeah.
And my cats are so lazy. It's unbelievable. Frankly, they get away with murder. Why do they do it? You're on the list. I like it.
I suspect it's because they just like chaos, but who knows?
I like this. Well, why do cats push things off tables and worktops and things? 0345 6060 973. What makes a mug microwave safe? Why does the sun appear to be moving faster as it sets? Why are our eyes inexorably drawn to the subtitles even if we understand what's being said on the screen? Why can a raven land on a live train track? What's it called? Track? A live train track, yeah? Like a live cake? What? I don't know. You know, the thing on the train with the electricity. How can a bird land on a live rail? Rail! Not track, a live rail. Thank you. Why are statues so rubbish? That's my own question. Why does fizzy water lose its fizz if you heat it up? And why do cats enjoy pushing things off things so much? So it's a strange one this week, but I like it. Mark is in Chingford. Mark, question or answer?
Okay, question. Proper nervous, so here we go.
It's only me.
Oh, no. So, mince pie.
Yeah.
Okay, you know the ingredients, i.e. to make the mince pies if you was doing it at home.
Yeah.
Why is the bit that you put in it called mince meat?
Yeah.
But it's not actually mince meat?
Yeah. As
you
in,
know what I mean?
well, you mean it's not minced with a D, minced meat.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, this is quite Christmassy, isn't it?
Yeah, that's why I thought, I'm going in.
And that's why I know the answer, because it's come up before at previous Christmases.
Ah.
And it's I mean, when I tell you, you'll think, oh, blimey, yeah, of course, that makes perfect sense. So it's pretty simple that it used to have meat in it. So mince meat with no D, as opposed to minced meat that you might use to make a bolognese or something like that.
Sure.
The old usage of it would be to describe meat that was preserved by the addition of spices. So you'd like have beef, but with raisins and currants and spices and all the stuff and cinnamon and all the stuff that we now have in minced meat. But as the years have passed, obviously we took the meat out of it. Yeah. Because it would be pretty gross to have a lump of beef in your mince pie.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we took the meat out of it, and the name mince meat remained. It's that simple.
Thank you. Give yourself a round of applause. I'm going to kick myself.
Ho, 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 Mark. and the booze. I think there's rum in it and stuff. So preserving the meat was preserved. I love that question. You shouldn't kick yourself at all. Simon's in Southampton. Simon, question or answer?
Hi, James. It's an answer.
Carry on, Simon.
To the question about how a raven can, or any bird can sit on a live rail without being absolutely obliterated.
Yes.
So it's the same reason that a bird can sit on a power line. To create a electrical circuit, electricity will always take the path of least resistance to ground. You kind of mentioned that yourself, I think. So a raven sitting on a live rail has no path to ground at all. They're just purely sitting on that rail. Therefore, they will be essentially insulated from the ground.
And if they lifted one foot from the rail and put it on the ground, they'd be toast.
Absolutely, yeah.
And they presumably they've worked that out. It'd be quite hard to do, I suppose. But if again, a human, and absolutely no one must ever try this, but you could walk as long as you didn't earth yourself, you'd be safe on a live rail as well.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't recommend it.
No, I'm not. I'm saying don't do
try
it.
this at home.
Absolutely not. Qualifications?
Yeah. So in my previous career, I was a qualified electrician.
And what do you do now, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm an air traffic controller.
Oh, I think I knew that, didn't I?
Well, you may have. We've never actually spoken before, but yeah, first time caller on this show.
Yeah, well, that's a lovely use of your qualification. How long did it take you to train as an air traffic? I've got a mate who is thinking about retraining as an air traffic controller.
Oh, so it took me about 3 years start to finish, and highly recommend it.
Yeah, good man. Have a round of applause on me.
Thank you very much.
Oh, lovely answer. Thank you, Simon. I hope that David in Brixton is pleased with that. And I could have taken that round of applause myself, but I wasn't 100% certain, so I didn't. Paddy's in Thornton-le-Dale in Yorkshire. Paddy, question or answer?
It's a question, James.
Carry on.
When you look at an old photograph of like an old high street or something, in black and white usually, why does the hill, if there is one, not look as steep?
You what?
So the hill that I'm thinking of is Smiddy Hill in Pickering.
Right.
And it's a middling slope hill.
Okay.
But then when you look at a black and white photograph of it, and it looks like nothing.
Really?
I think so. You might have to check it, but...
Well, how am I going to check it? I'd need to get a selection of photos. Just
pick a hill that you love.
Okay.
And then look for an old photograph of it.
Have you got a favourite hill?
Probably Smiddy Hill.
You like Smiddy Hill? I like. I mean, the hill I think of first is probably Comberton Hill in Kidderminster because A, my mum had a shop there for many years, and B, it's how you get to the football. You can't really get to Agborough, especially if you're on foot. It's where the station is, and it's got one of my favourite fish and chip shops in the world. But this isn't what you rang in for, really, is it?
It's all lovely information.
So I'm on a Facebook group that looks at old pictures, publishes a lot of pictures. It's run by a lovely man called Gary, who I hope is listening. Because I know he was listening the other day when I was talking about Owen and Owen in Kidderminster, where my mum used to work. But the pictures he posts are often in black and white, and he has posted pictures of Comberton Hill in black and white. Station Hill to a lot of locals, in case anyone in Kidderminster is getting confused. And I can't say that I've noticed it looks less steep in the black and white photos than it does in the modern ones. Are you comparing it to real life or to colour photographs?
To real life.
Oh. So you're standing there looking at it. Your eyes are going to be at the same level that the camera was at. Or are they? In the olden days, would they have held their camera at waist height when they took a picture?
I didn't know whether it was to do with the amount of time it took to take the photograph.
Yeah, the long exposure, but I don't know why that would have an effect on... And you could be just the only person on the planet who's ever made this observation, and there is no reality or truth in it and no explanation at all. But I'm curious now.
Get Googling some hills.
Well, any old hill will do, but we'll focus on Smiddy Hill in Pickering, and we will ask why why do hills in general look less steep in black and white photographs than they do? I'll tell you what, Paddy, if we get an answer to this, I'll give you the money myself.
Thanks, James.
You're welcome. It's coming up to 12:30. You're listening to James O'Brien. Is that tomorrow's? Can we do that? 12 o'clock on a Friday? What's your favourite hill? Would that work for a fact, do you think? I like to step back from some of the nastier elements of the news on a Friday afternoon. What's your favourite hill? Pick a hill that you love, Nick says, is the loveliest phrase that I've heard in a while. And you're absolutely right. And is it just one picture that Paddy's seen? Or is it every picture of a hill? I've never heard that before, but it may turn out to be true. Quite often, the more I mock a question for being daft, the more likely it becomes that it will quickly emerge that it wasn't a daft question at all. Although I've got to tell you, I'm quietly confident on this one. Well, we'll see, all right? It's coming up to 12:30. You're listening to James O'Brien's Mystery Hour on LBC. Here is Amelia Cox with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:32. Castle Hill in Thetford is the best hill in Norfolk, writes Steve in Wyndham. I spent many a day as a child climbing it before the stairs. The hill in the Hovis advert with Ronnie Barker looks... It didn't have Ronnie Barker in it, the Hovis ad. You mean the woman who's wheeling a bike up a hill? That's oddly not in Yorkshire. That's in Dorset or somewhere like that. You're listening to What's Your Favourite Hill with James O'Brien. And I sometimes tell you that your sense of humour is ahead of me, and that something will appear in my inbox, and I'll be like, what's that about? And then I'll realise the joke that you've made a little moment too late, just a beat too late, and I'll have a little chuckle to myself. So thank you to Warren, who actually used a picture, but lots of other people have made the same joke. Warren just sent me a picture of the late, great Jimmy Hill. And so that just appeared on my Blue Sky feed. And I look at, why is he sending me a picture of Jimmy Hill? Hill. Favourite Hill. Thank you. Jimmy Hill. Or Benny Hill. Jack and Jill Hill. Damon Hill. Gypsy Hill. Favourite hill. Paul's in Brentford. No hills in Brentford, Paul.
No, not really.
But there is... Do you like the new bridge?
Oh, yeah, across the canal.
Yeah, with the red grit on it.
Yeah, I really like it, yeah.
I think it's a game changer, isn't it? It's a lovely bridge. It's really nicely designed as well.
I think it looks really good. I mean, and the one a little bit further up the canal that goes into the bottom of Boston Manor Park, that's relatively new because they replaced the old
That's exactly right.
wooden one.
Have you done the double yet? Have you come out of Boston Manor, walked through the park, gone over that bridge to get onto the other side of the... Well, I suppose it depends where in Brentford you live, but if you're trying to get to my side of town, you go over that bridge and then you come back over the other bridge. So you do a double canal crossing and you shave about 10 minutes off your journey home, 5 minutes off your journey home.
Well, the answer to the question is I'll probably try it tomorrow morning with the dog. So
lovely stuff. Lovely stuff.
So thank you.
Mind how you go. Question or answer?
It's an answer.
Carry on.
So it's the carbon dioxide in the fizzy water.
Oh, yes.
So the thing is, as temperature increases in the water, the solubility of the carbon dioxide in the water decreases. So therefore, it leaves the bottle as bubbles. So the bubbles just come out because the solubility decreases.
Why does the solubility decrease? Do we know?
Because it's just a fact of it's just like
what happens to the heat. What happens to the
physics stroke chemistry that as the temperature goes up,
The solubility goes down.
Less of the gas dissolves. But this has got it's not just a question of fizzy water. If you think about the oceans and you think about global heating, so the oceans have got lots and lots of carbon dioxide in there. Yeah. So the temperature has gone up because of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. That heats the water, so less carbon dioxide dissolves in the water, so it comes out. So it's one of the examples of positive feedback. It's a positive feedback loop. And as the temperature keeps on increasing, the amount of carbon dioxide coming out of the oceans is just going to get more and more and more and more.
Wow!
And that's the really scary thing about the whole thing.
And I was today years old when I properly understood that. I kind of had a vague grasp of it, but I didn't know. That was brilliant. So what we've done here, this is why I love Mystery Hour, Paul, is a question that was really inspired by a hot toddy. Rachel's tickly throat and her treatment of it has taken us into a very important lesson about global warming itself.
100%.
Qualifications?
I've been a science teacher for 43 years now.
Good Lord. You must be near the end now, mustn't you? You must deserve a break.
I'm only 2 days a week now, so,
lovely.
I'm at the tail end, but...
well, I bet you've got a gear. I mean, the way you just explained that means your pupils are lucky to have you. Have a round of applause on me.
Thank you.
Thank you, and enjoy your dog walk tomorrow as well. I may see you on that bridge at some point, but don't feel any need to say hello. It is 12:36. You are listening to James O'Brien, unless you want to, of course. I'm saying don't feel any requirement. Simon is in Portsmouth. Simon, question or answer?
Hi, question, James.
Carry on.
What's the criteria for something to be classed as old school? Old school tunes, old school. How long do you have to be to become old school?
Well, there isn't any criteria, is there? Well, you think there's like an old school council that sits there and decides, it's been 17 years now since that banging tune first hit the hit parade. We can call it old school now. It's just a way of saying old-fashioned, isn't it? A different way of saying old.
But how old has it got to be old-fashioned?
Well, this is up to you. It's in the eye of the it's in the eye of the be older. Oh, that was pathetic. I don't think. I mean, I'll put it on the board if you want. But I'm not going to lie. I'm surprised you got through with that one, Simon, to be honest. So do you think you get told off? Say, that's a bit old school. You go, no, it isn't. It's only 11 years old. I think you'll find it's quite middle school or new school. What are you thinking of when you say old school? You mean like behaviour? He's quite old school or something like that. Back in the day.
Behaviour tunes.
Yeah, but it's a bit like, you wouldn't ring in and say, when was back in the day, would you? No, so why you could have said, all right, it's on the board. I'm sorry, it may turn out to be a brilliant question. How old do you have to be? Yeah, I love it. Am I an old school? I could be an old school presenter now. I was the future once. I arrived here, I was wet behind the ears. Now, by far the youngest in the schedule. Far from being the youngest in the schedule. I like that. How old does it have to be old school? Or why do we even say old school? I tell you what, let's give him a break and say, what's the etymology of it? Where does it come from? The idea of something being old school. Ian's in Aberdeen. Ian, question or answer?
It's an answer, James.
Carry on, Ian.
Black and white cameras are, if you're taking a black and white print, it's usually an old print from an old camera.
Yeah.
Not always, but usually.
Yeah.
Now, most old cameras have fixed lenses, and they're usually...
shut the front door. He's right. It's true.
The fixed lens is a wide-angle lens, not a telephoto.
So we'll look shallower.
When you use a wide-angle lens, a hill looks much flatter on it than it does on a telephoto.
I knew this was going to happen as soon as I started taking the mickey out of him, that it would actually turn out not to be a ridiculous question at all. And it's not. But Paddy was absolutely right to notice.
Yeah, he's right. No, he's right.
Qualifications?
I've been a photographer for 60 years.
60, yeah, that'll do. Because if it was 59, you wouldn't be old school. You know that. Because you're 60 years, you could be old school. Round of applause for Ian, please. Is it silly to ask? Is there anything you particularly enjoy taking photographs of, or is that a silly question?
I've produced a whole series of books about different things. Whiskey, I like distilleries.
Yes.
Distilleries and people, Romania and whiskey are my two things.
Oh, fantastic. Do they make any whiskey in Romania?
No, but they make lovely hooch.
Hooch.
It's called Harinka.
There you go. Yeah, you live and learn. Ian, that's really lovely. Thank you. And I mean, credit to Paddy. He's absolutely right. Not only is he correct in his observations, but it turns out to be a brilliant question with a fascinating answer. Pete's in Lancaster. Pete, question or answer?
It's a question, please, James.
Carry on, Pete.
First time on, by the way.
You're very
well
welcome.
done.
Thank you. Well done, you. Well done. Go on.
No, well done, you.
No, well done, you. I'm here every day. We say well done to me. Well done to you. It's your first time.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Well done.
Right. Well, anyway, my question is, when do we start getting new surnames for people? So, for example, Barber or Gardener are quite common surnames.
Baker
or
Smith.
Hairdresser or librarian or air traffic controller aren't.
So you wouldn't be known by like James Radio host, James Radio.
No.
James. So
yeah, and also with place names, you can have Glasgow or Lancaster or Bjork or Hill as a place name.
They often translate. Yeah, no, just keep it on the
Stevenage or
keep it on the people.
Okay.
Because otherwise it'll get too confusing. So are we wondering when it stopped?
Yeah, when did we stop getting new names?
When did we stop calling people after their livelihood?
Yeah.
Okay. I like that. I don't know that we'll get an answer, but we might do. It could be something that I've got a couple of Anglo-Saxon scholars who listen to the programme. They might be good at this kind. They might be good at this kind of thing. We'll try and find out for you. When did we stop calling people? I mean, it's not just livelihoods or jobs or professions. Sometimes there'd be physical attributes as well, but that I mean, mine is a clan name. O'Brien is a clan name, but yeah, all the Smiths, all the Coopers, they were all originally names that were given to people who did those jobs for a living. Thank you, Pete. I like that. Job names. When? Brian is in Croydon. Brian, question or answer?
It's an answer, James.
Carry on, Brian.
First-time caller, not at all nervous.
That's the spirit. Carry on.
I know. Subtitles.
Yes.
So, your eyes are naturally drawn to two key things, light and movement. So if you take, hunting, birds of prey or lions and things like that, they're looking for a break in the pattern of the ground. And so when they see something move,
yes,
they're naturally drawn to it.
Of course.
Also, photographs, paintings, things like that, I call them hotspots. So if you get a light area in a painting or a photograph, your eye's naturally drawn towards that light.
And the subtitles are illuminated in a way that the action on the screen is not.
They're doing both. They're usually white font, white text, and they're scrolling across the screen. So they interfere with what you're trying to watch.
That's why they're drawn to them.
Simple
Could you train yourself out of it if you watched like hours and hours and hours and hours of subtitled television?
I don't know because I can't stand subtitles. My eldest daughter has to watch subtitles, the way she processes information.
Yeah,
and forgets to turn them off.
Yeah,
it annoys the life out of me. So I'm like yourself. I have to scrabble around the remote control to find a way of turning them off.
And it does take. Keith thought I was being a bit stupid when I said that, but sometimes it's quite hard to find the bit that you need to find to turn them off again. That's so qualifications.
30 years in the photographic industry.
Only 30. The last fella had 60.
Yeah,
He's old school. He's old school.
I'm young school.
You are young school. Round of applause for Brian.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Oh, that's a great answer. Got a lot of happy Davids today. David who asked the question about the bird. David who asked the question about the subtitles. No one's answered my question about statues. Is it? Maybe it's not true that statues are worse than ever, but it just seems to me that we seem to see more statues being made that don't look anything like their subject than I remember happening in previous years. Bob's in Durham. Bob, question or answer?
Hi, James.
Hello,
question,
Bob.
please.
Carry on.
Right, it might take a little bit of explaining, so bear with me.
Go on.
Right, so what I want to know is there a word that defines the phenomenon of when you add a letter to a word, it changes the sound of the other letters in that word?
For example?
Have. If you have the word have,
and
you stick an S on the front, it becomes shave. So adding the S changes the sound that the A makes.
Got it.
Yeah, is there a word that defines that?
Are there lots of other examples of that?
Yeah, well, there's loads of them.
Because
I
I'm
can't
not
give any off the top of my head.
No, well,
at this
that's the
point.
problem, isn't it? Is that you put pressure on yourself and you can't think of any, and then as soon as you put the phone down, you'll think of a dozen straight away.
I haven't forgotten them all, yes, but it happens a lot. You do it a lot in
So
words
you've got a word, you add one letter to it, and the pronunciation changes entirely, even though the massive majority of the letters are exactly the same as they were before.
That's essentially it, yes.
Why do you want to know?
Idle curiosity.
Is that all? Because I'm really interested now in that. It's the kind of thing that Susie Dent would know, isn't it?
Oh yeah. Do you know her? Could you ask her?
I do actually. Yeah, I could. But I'm not. You know, I'm just. I'm not. You make me sound like I'm name dropping now and showing off. She's been a guest on Full Disclosure. We've exchanged occasional messages. She's absolutely lovely. One of the loveliest people you could meet in this industry.
An old friend of mine used to work with her and said she was lovely.
There you go. You see. So if Susie's listening today, she'd probably get a Ray Liotta, wouldn't she? If Susie were to ring in and answer this question.
Definitely.
I think that would be a shoo-in. Bob, thank you. I'll see what we can do. The time is 12:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
So you could do yes and then add an E to the beginning of yes. And what do you get? Eyes. So is there a word for the phenomenon that sees a single letter added to a word completely change the pronunciation of all the other letters, all the original letters in the word? I like that a lot. Charlie's in Walthamstow. Charlie, question or answer?
Well, it's sort of an answer to the old school thing.
Oh, yeah.
There's no definitive answer, but I can tell you when the term was first ever used.
Seriously?
Yeah. It was used to describe a musical genre. And how I know this was because I've been playing soul and funk since 1980, 81.
Right.
And what happened was a lot of the soul DJs at the time, they started looking back and they found all these sort of obscure album tracks. The one tune I'd say that is the anthem, the original old school anthem is Gwen McRae, All This Love
I'm Giving. Really? Go on.
Well, that tune was basically rediscovered because of the old school movement. And I remember at the time, because a lot of the tunes were album tracks and the recording level, obviously it was all analog, and the recording levels were really poor. So it was really find a full set of decent tunes. But I remember thinking at the time, I mean, I'm so old school, I spell school with a C and an H rather than a K. And I'm not keen on bad spelling, you know.
No.
But I've since heard the term being used for tunes, for genres that come after. Like when I've heard people describe two-step garage, which came sort of early 90s, as old school, which came after the original old school. And the producer asked me, how would you... I would say that baby boomers.
Yeah.
And then what have you got after that?
What,
Is it
immediately?
Generation X?
That might be Gen X, I don't know.
Right, so whatever prevailed in the baby... This applies not to the baby boomers, but the relevant sections. Whatever prevailed in the preceding section, the next section after that would call that old school.
So like a genre, an evolution of genres, and you're harking back to the previous one, and you'd call that old school.
Yeah, I know, but I've heard the term old school being used for anything.
Well, it will be. No, but I like the way you've specified it. You brought it back to music, which is where I've come across it most constantly. And I know you've already told us, but just for the benefit of the tape, Charlie, what are your qualifications?
I've been DJing 10 years more than I've been engineering, and I've been engineering 30 years.
Old school DJ?
Yeah, mate.
There it is. Round of applause for Charlie. You playing this weekend?
No, but I've got a few lined up.
That's always good to hear. Take it easy. 12:51 is the time. Mark's in Barrow in Furness. Mark, question or answer?
Hello again, my friend. It's an answer.
Hello, Mark. How are you?
I'm all right. How are you?
Can't complain. It's been a while. Actually, we've not had any questions in your purview.
Not really, no. Things that other people with specific expertise could probably handle better, but
Fair
here
enough.
I am. I was about to call about the surnames, but I've got a better one.
Good.
Which is the two letters together.
Yes.
And these are called digraphs.
Okay.
And in many cases, the number of letters in an alphabet isn't enough to cover all the phonemes, the actual sounds. So some of the sounds have to be represented by combinations of letters, usually two, And this is a very regular thing. So it isn't a question of adding a letter. It's a question of a combination of two standing on its own. So, for example, SH normally stands for sh.
Yes.
As in ship. It doesn't have much to do with the sound of S on its own.
No.
Or H on its own. Another one is PH, which represents F. And those are usually Greek words in origin. But the PH forms a digraph. You can't say there are two sounds in the PH. There's one sound represented by two letters together.
You said ship, didn't you?
Ship, yeah.
I love that. So that's the name of the two-word thing. Is there a name for the process for when for the fact that the sound changes? So if you people call it a magic E. Don't they sometimes?
Yeah, things like, yes, I mean, you get things like mute E at the end of words, which changes the vowel quality and that sort of thing. I don't think there's any one technical word for the process.
But what we're describing is a digraph.
A digraph, yeah.
Qualifications?
Professional linguist over many years and regular featuring on this show, but not recently.
No, well, hopefully we can, now that we're back in business, we'll hear from you more often. But it all depends on the questions. Even Mystery Hour royalty, like Mark, has no guarantee of opportunity. Round of applause, please. 12:53 is the time. So what's still on the board? We've done pretty well this week. Well, we've got Ali's mug still there. We've got Ali's mug and Marty's sunset still not answered. Why does the sun seem to fall faster as it sets? What makes a mug microwave proof? We've done the subtitles. We've done the Raven. No one's going to answer my question about statues. I don't know why I bother. Why do cats like pushing things off edges? We've gone old school. And when did we stop calling people by names that were linked to their jobs, their livelihoods? Andy's in Horsham. Andy, question or answer?
Oh, hello there, James. Hello. It's an answer, and I'm very nervous to tell you the truth.
It's only me, Andy.
Oh, I know. I've been listening to you for years, but I'm so nervous. But anyway.
It'll be grand.
You know.
Yeah. Come on.
Well, it's a sunset question and how it appears to be quicker.
Oh, yes.
Well, the sun is a fixed point. We travel around the sun at the same speed, and we spin on our axis at the same speed. So the simple answer is it's not quicker. However, it's all about perception and contact.
Yes.
Right? So if you think about, if you remember the film The Aviator?
Yes.
Horace Hughes and Leonardo DiCaprio, they did a big scene with World War I airplanes. It was a dogfight, and with a lot of planes. There was no clouds in the sky. Horace Hughes had decided these planes aren't moving, and had to wait a couple of days before there was dotted clouds in the sky. The clouds or the planes then appeared to move quicker, and they weren't. So therefore, the context of the same sun in the sky, it just moves slowly.
Yes.
But as it reaches the ground, as in the horizon, there is two contexts there. There's the ground and the big ball of sun. So it just seems to go quicker.
Yeah, that's kind of what I said, but depending on what you say next, that will either split the round of applause or you'll get all of it. What are your qualifications?
Well, I don't have any qualifications with that. I learned this in school. They did speak about exactly that, and then I watched The Aviator, and it was then explained all in The Aviator why they did the scene again, and they spent more on that one scene than they did for the whole rest of the film, apparently.
That's strong play. Round of applause for Andy.
Thank you.
Thank you. There have been some really good questions and answers this week. Paul's in Guildford. Paul, question or answer?
It's an answer, James.
Carry on, mate.
So it's to the mug question. What makes it microwave safe, microwave proof?
Yes.
So it's to do with the temperature at which the ceramic is fired at. So you've got earthenware, which is low-fired, porous ceramics like your flower pots, which hold water.
Right.
And then you've got your more stoneware-fired ceramics, where the body becomes what we call vitreous. So it means that the glass particles melt and they seal the body so it can't absorb water, which is why it would be microwave safe, is because water can't get into the body and make it scalding hot.
So if you'd bought a mug from a craft fair or something like that, it may not have been fired at such a high temperature and it would not be microwave proof.
Exactly.
Qualifications?
I'm Potter.
Oh, right. Is that your name as well? Are you Paul Potter?
No, I'm Paul Wheeler, so it sounds a bit like...
Close.
That's hilarious. I wonder if you could get you in the other question about when we stop being named after our jobs. What, is that your actual profession? Do you want to plug a website or something like that, Paul? It's entirely up to you.
Yes, it's guildfordpottery.com.
Oh, lovely. Fantastic. What is the best thing to pot?
I really like making teapots.
Yeah.
Just because I love the construction of all of it and all the fiddly bits.
I love people who love their work. Thank you, Paul. Have a round of applause on me.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's pretty good, actually. There's not a lot left. Jobs names. Did we give Charlie a round of applause, the DJ? Keith? We did. Someone's just sent me a message saying we didn't. But only one person, so they probably misheard. James is in Brighton. Question or answer?
It's an answer. It's kind of a part 2 answer to the Sunset
we like
question.
That. An addendum.
Yes, it's not a steward's inquiry. It's just a...
God forbid. We haven't had a steward's inquiry for years, have we? I can't know. What's your addendum?
So what the other guy said, I've forgotten his name, sorry, was completely right. It's basically because
Andy,
of
on the sun.
The different... Yeah, the relative position of the horizon and the sun, and that's completely correct. However, technically, it appears to go slower. Now, Let me explain what I mean. So, if you have the sun, if you look at it sort of at the top of the sky, like when it's at noon or whatever, it's moving at a certain speed. I don't know what that, it appears to be moving at a certain speed. As it gets lower in the sky, if you imagine yourself sort of standing on the beach looking at the horizon, the further out to the horizon, the more sort of air and atmosphere there is out there. So as the sun passes into that, light gets refracted more, which is the same reason why like the sky appears red at sunset, for example. But as it passes into that, the sort of apparent position of the sun, because of the light's being refracted more, will appear slightly higher in the sky than it would otherwise. So the sort of effect of that is that it technically would appear slower,
The higher it was.
The lower it gets to the horizon,
but everyone thought it appeared quicker.
The higher it would appear. Yeah, I know, but that's because of what
the other thing that Andy said. Wow, what are your qualifications?
You're not. I got really interested in sunsets like 10 years ago because I wanted to find out about the green flash, and so I've just found out all this just by researching that.
Hang on, Sheila Fogarty is waving at me.
I've seen a green flash.
So have I. It's brilliant, isn't it?
Oh, it's amazing. I was in a helicopter in New Zealand when I saw a green flash.
Oh, yeah, you win.
Where did you see yours, James?
I've seen a few, mostly in Malta.
Wow. Well, you live and learn. Well, have a round of applause as well. Sheila's never had one of them.
And do you know the myth? Well, I think it's a myth, but the idea that whoever's with you when you see the green flash is the love of your life.
You think it's a myth? I'd go all in on that if I were you.
Well, don't dismiss the magic.
All right, who were you with?
Well, I don't want to say exactly who I was with, but
we,
in a funny way, we were the loves of each other's life.
Good Lord.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's a hook and tease. More on this after the news. That is it from me for another day. I'm going to give it to Paddy this week, who asked the question about the hills, because I think that I was unduly dismissive, and also it was a really interesting answer and question. But it could have been any one of a dozen people this week.
Can't I have a Ray Liotta?
No.
What do I have to do to get one of those?
You have to be supremely well qualified to answer the question that is being asked.
Oh.
So there's
well,
always
I did
time.
see a green flash.
Yeah, but that wasn't even relevant to the question.
Oh, it was lovely though.
Well, I look forward to the day when you are supremely well qualified to answer a question.
If
you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a dizzying range of podcasts. So do download it now for free from your app store, or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
Thank you very much,
Green
James.
Flash Fogarty.
Flash Fogarty, that's me.
James O'Brien on LBC.